Committee to order.
iPad and put that in for there.
I'd first like to thank and welcome our two student representatives to the board, James Pathulis and Mason Schleif. Would y'all please introduce yourselves briefly? Let us know a little bit about yourselves. Start with Ms. Schleif.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mason Schleif. I am a third-year student at the University of Minnesota Rochester in the Bachelor of Health Science program. I'm originally from Lowry, Minnesota, which is close to Alexandria, so Regent Anderson is right in my ballpark. And then my career aspirations, I'm currently looking into the University of Minnesota nursing program for the master's, and then continuing into the NP. So,
Awesome.
thank you.
Welcome. Mr. Pathulis.
Thanks, Regent Omari. I'm James Pathulis. I'm a medical student here at the University of Minnesota, and I'm representing all the different professional programs that encompass professional student government. I'm from Rochester. I went to college at St. John's University, and I'm undecided in terms of what I want to practice, but I'm sure in third year during rotations I'll figure that out.
Great.
I'm happy to be here today.
Welcome to both of you. We look forward to your engagement throughout the year. So the first item we have is the committee work plan. Everyone should have had the opportunity to review that at some point. And I will focus a few things that I just want to mention. Number one is that we'll have a series of focused conversations around graduate and professional education that will begin today and will carry into several meetings throughout the year. During today's conversation, we welcome your feedback and input on the work plan throughout the year. So I'll turn to Provost Hanson if she has any comments, and then if not, all right, I'll open it to the floor. Any comments, suggestions, questions for the work plan? Great, seeing none, we will move on to the second item. Where's Regent Swigum? Because I'm already ahead of schedule. Number two, report on academic program changes for discussion. This is an item that we see every year. And I first want to acknowledge the provost staff because we approve a lot of changes, new programs, deletions of programs throughout the year. And it does not go without a lot of work on the back end, and we're going to learn a lot about that today. But I just want to give a nod to the staff who work on academic program changes throughout the year. And with that, I will turn to Provost Hanson, who's going to join at the front table. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the board. Also, later today, in this first session, Associate Dean Mike White from the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences will be here to talk about the process, give an example of how we go about creating, changing, or discontinuing academic programs. As you know, it's part of your regular board schedule not only to approve academic program changes, but also to review the process for academic program review and approval. The consent agenda often comes at the end of your meetings, but it's crucial for you to know that by the time the academic program proposals reach you via the consent agenda, they've been vetted through a process that's intellectually and administratively rigorous. The exact process is detailed in your docket, so I won't go into great detail again here. But as you know, the vetting process is comprehensive. All involved or affected parties are consulted as program changes are routed through the various stages of consultation and approval. The process is collaborative and iterative, with different parts of the process examining each proposal for different things. Faculty, given their content expertise in the academic disciplines, are the generators of new programs. Based on their knowledge of developments in their academic fields, their understanding of regional and national workforce needs, and their receptiveness to changes in student demand for certain types of knowledge and credentializing, faculty propose new subplans, minors, certificates, and academic degree programs. These proposals are reviewed and then sometimes redrafted and resubmitted as the proposals receive feedback from home departments and collegiate curriculum committees, and then programs are open to review and feedback from faculty across the institution. Staff from the colleges, as well as staff in the Office of Undergraduate Education, the Graduate School, and the Office of the Provost, work with faculty and collegiate leadership to make sure there's compliance with all school and university policies and processes as program additions and changes find their way to the consent agenda for your consideration. The process is thorough and transparent. It requires faculty, with support from their departments and colleges, to evaluate the programs in terms of relevance to mission, student and employer or social demand, comparative advantage, efficiency, and impact. Before any proposal reaches the board on the consent agenda, various faculty and staff groups have considered its likely impact on students, faculty, and community stakeholders. Thought has been given to mission relevance, whether resources are being used effectively, and whether an academic program aligns with the priorities and responsibilities of the University of Minnesota. Both qualitative and quantitative data are gathered to inform decisions about the creation and discontinuation of academic programs. Of course, an approval process should strive for both agility or alacrity, getting things done quickly, and promotion, preservation of academic quality. We want new programs to be vetted thoroughly and conscientiously, and we also want departments and colleges to move through the process with ease and appropriate speed. Now, in addition to reminding you about the process, which I just did, this annual session also summarizes the the academic changes that we've made during this past year. As you recall from your docket materials, the programs added in 2017-18 included degrees such as a Master of Tribal Resources and Environmental Stewardship on the Duluth campus, and an undergraduate certificate in Career Readiness in the College of Liberal Arts on the Twin Cities campus. Additionally, our campus has created and discontinued a host of minors, certificates, and medical school fellowships. The exact numbers are in front of you now. At both the baccalaureate and post-baccalaureate levels, we netted just one degree program each. The bulk of program activity in the past year and in recent years has been in the area of minors and certificates. Because courses are the building blocks of degree programs at all levels, the creation of minors and certificates allows departments and colleges to give students new academic opportunities and credentials without developing expensive, large-scale programs. The creation of minors and certificates allows programs to be nimble and responsive to student needs, to changes in the academic fields, and to workforce demands, without necessarily incurring new costs. To pursue this issue a bit and talk a little bit more about the way in which we avoid additional costs, even while creating new academic programs, in fact, to get a clearer picture of what might constitute a new program, let's take a closer look at 2 degrees from the June 2018 consent agenda. At that meeting, you approved 2 new master's programs. If we unpack those programs and the language in the consent agenda, what becomes evident is the resourcefulness and creativity of faculty as they design compelling and useful academic experiences for University of Minnesota students. First, let's consider the Master of Arts in Asian Studies. This 30-credit program provides advanced training in Asian studies with an emphasis on the development of strong language proficiency and relevant cultural knowledge. Students in this program are required to complete at least 9 credits of language courses in one of 5 areas of emphasis. There are almost 4 dozen courses for the students to choose from, and all of these courses already existed. The remaining 21 credits of required and elective courses come from across the College of Liberal Arts, from areas such as comparative literature, film, history, art history, and anthropology. And these are courses that already existed, serving other programs. This is an example of a robust academic experience comprised entirely of existing courses. The only new thing about this program is thoughtful bundling of these courses. It gives students the opportunity to earn a coherent and useful degree. There are no new costs incurred in the creation or implementation of this program. Another example is the Master of Science in Cognitive Science. This degree was created to ensure that its students enrolled in the PhD program in Cognitive Science have a terminal degree option, should they elect not to finish a doctoral program. It's not unusual for PhD programs to have a master's level option for students for exactly this reason. Not only is this program comprised of existing courses, but it also doesn't directly enroll students. You can't apply for to be admitted to the master's. You approved a similar program in the fall of 2014 for a Master of Science in Business Research, a terminal degree option for the PhD in Business Administration. So, incorporating the changes of the past year, our total numbers of academic programs are before you on this slide. These numbers have remained relatively consistent over the past few years, with most numbers just changing very slightly, little reverberations here and there. The relative exceptions, and again, these are not large exceptions, are the numbers of undergraduate degrees at Duluth and Crookston, as well as the number of master's degrees on the Duluth and Twin Cities campuses. As many of you will recall from this presentation a few years ago, Duluth went through a very intentional curricular redesign, and many of these new degrees are simply reconfigurations of previously existing courses and programs of the sort I illustrated a few moments ago. The faculty decided on a better configuration, and then that has supplanted something that was there before. Crookston continues to be innovative and responsive to the specific needs of its region, and the increase in master's degrees on the Duluth and Twin Cities campuses is largely attributable to strategic opportunities in the development of professional master's programs. Again, the creation of new programs does not necessarily translate into new costs, nor does the discontinuation of programs necessarily lead to saving resources. I know you've heard us say this before, but it's a crucial point for planning, and we want to give you examples of it. So finally, it might be helpful to review what actually comprises a degree program. Again, courses are the basic building blocks of academic programs. We can, as an example, see the project of degree program construction through the lens of the 120 credit undergraduate degree on the Twin Cities campus. First, you think in terms of the types of credits or courses a student is expected to complete. There are collegiate requirements. Those are courses or credits that all students in a particular college are expected to take, regardless of major or degree program. There are liberal education credits, which are credits integrated into a degree program to ensure some basic breadth in undergraduate degrees. All undergraduate students on the Twin Cities campus are expected to fulfill these requirements, regardless of their college or degree program. These credits very often overlap with other categories of credits, such as program requirements. Program requirements are what we often call a student's major. These are the courses and credits in their official program of study, the area they'll get their degrees in. And then finally, there are elective credits, which are additional courses that supplement a student's major or degree program. So, as a student progresses through a 120 credit degree program, and all our undergraduate degrees can be completed in 120 credits, and that took some effort because many programs have a lot of requirements. They make their way through a carefully thought out configuration of courses. The work faculty do to ensure the rigor and relevance of these curricula, coupled with the choices students make to personalize their experiences, create academically unique and intellectually stimulating degree programs. These degree programs are comprised of, first of all, program requirements, then the liberal education credits that sometimes overlap with program requirements, and then additional liberal education requirements or credits, and elective credits. On top of that, there are the collegiate requirements, and that nice graphic is due to this person who also oversees much of the vetting of these by making sure we have the right processes of consultation. This is Emily Ronning. This slide is meant to illustrate that depending on the degree program, the next slide, the proportion of types of credits will vary. What you see represented on this slide are approximations of, from your left to right, a statistics degree, an engineering degree, note all the requirements there, and an English degree. There's a significant amount of variability when it comes to the flexibility students experience in their degree programs. While English majors have a good deal of room to explore courses and direct some of their own study, engineering students, because of ABET requirements, have a more prescribed and structured trajectory through their majors. And then here's another very creative graphic, which again is due to Emily. It's worth noting, as we think about that, you can see the different way the mortarboard looks with the different layers. But with this one, what you have a sense of is how courses can play a role and a different role for different students. Left to right, you have representations of first a psychology course, then a kinesiology course, and then an English course. What is represented there is the idea that what could be a collegiate requirement for many students might be an elective to a few others. And in other cases, when we look at the middle graphic there, a course might be completely restricted, that is, made available only to students in a particular major. And then, graphic on the far right, there are courses that are available to and in fact attract a wide range of participants. So that gives you a brief overview of what you see at every meeting in the consent agenda and how it all adds up in the year and what the process amounts to. So to give more flesh to this outline, I've asked Associate Dean Michael White to join me and share with you some illustrative detail about the intentionality of the curricular processes in the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. Associate Dean White, welcome, and please, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Chair Omari, and members of the board. I'm here to essentially give some examples to, I think, what the Provost was just talking about. And I've been asked to share with you some of the information and the processes that we go through in our college for curricular change, development, and evolution. You may recall that a handful of years ago, CFANS went through a 3-year process of curricular strategic planning. And in that process, it was a faculty-driven process. In fact, that's one of the things I want to emphasize is that the curriculum is owned by the faculty. So administrators like me, I'm a faculty member, so I have input in my own curriculum and program, but I don't have influence on what other programs within the college do because the curriculum is owned by the faculty. And so this was a faculty-driven process where we looked at our curriculum, we consulted very deeply and broadly with industry. CFANS has really strong ties with industry and external stakeholders, and the faculty have very strong relationships there, and we get a lot of feedback about what kinds of degrees they would like to see our students coming out with, what kinds of experiences within a degree, and things like that. So we broadly consulted with industry, external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. We also are very connected with our students, and we want to listen to and respond to their needs. And then we consulted broadly across the university as well. And so this was a painstaking process that took a number of years, and in that process, we actually discontinued a number of majors. We combined some others, and we did create a couple. And the ones we created in this case were interdisciplinary or interdepartmental, where we would essentially cross the different boundaries that used to kind of be siloed in certain areas, because that's what we heard the students wanted, that's what we heard industry wanted, and the faculty wanted to respond to that and evolve. So in the end of that process, we wound up with fewer majors than we had before, and we had a number of combined and new majors that are continuing on today. And so this is nearly 5 years ago, and we've even had some evolution then within that process, because we want to be nimble, but we also want to you to understand that when we do curricular change, from development of a course to the development of a track within a major or a minor or even a new major, it is painstaking. It takes a lot of effort and time, and faculty don't take on those kinds of things lightly. They have to be deeply committed in order to want to develop that course or develop that track or major. When this does happen, we have quite a number of processes that have to happen. So within a major, let's say, or in a department, and a new course might be proposed, it goes through that department's curriculum committee and has a lot of scrutiny. They do an awful lot of, that's where they do a lot of collaboration and collecting of information from stakeholders, industry, students. And they then look at their discipline and they create what they consider a good course or a good program of study. That has to be vetted through the department. Once it goes through the department, then it is put forward to the collegiate curriculum committee. And with that, we also have to do broad, we have to reach out broadly to the university to make sure we're not overlapping anything else, because one thing we don't want to do is reinvent the wheel. We don't want to create duplicative courses or experiences. So we reach out broadly to every college, every department, especially those that would make sense in a certain discipline. And we collect that information. We then, the process is iterative in that usually things are put back to the faculty and back to the department from the college with certain requests for various aspects or clarity, or make it clear that it fits what needs to be done, addressing the kinds of comments we're getting from across the university. And then ultimately it goes to the Central Curriculum Committee, which does a very similar process. It makes sure that broad consultation has occurred. It makes sure that it makes sense, makes sure there is no replication. Then ultimately it comes to you for approval. And so it is a pretty painstaking process, and faculty are very busy people, and so they don't tend to do this unless it's something very, very important to them. I thought I'd wind up with a couple of examples. So one of the things that has happened since we did this curricular changing in the last couple of years or few years was our Department of Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering wanted to respond to industry and student needs to understand the sustainability, or have a major that was about the sustainability of the built environment, not the natural environment, but the built environment. And so they developed this new major, Sustainable Systems Management, which you approved a year or two ago. And when that was done, we knew that there was a track of study or a program of study in an existing interdisciplinary major in the college, Environmental Science, Policy, and Management. I'll abbreviate it ESPM. And we had to then remove that track from ESPM so that we didn't have this replication. This was very difficult. It was politically difficult. People were very married to these programs. So there was a lot of internal work that had to be done. We did the work. And then many of the courses that were in that track in ESPM were then just transferred over with very minor modifications to the new major. And in the new major, there was one or two courses that were developed specifically to essentially fill that major out. So that's an example. And another example is we're in the process and have developed a couple of 4+1 programs where students add a year and they wind up with a master's. One reason we did that in nutrition was because the Dietetics Association made the decision that to be a dietitian, you needed a master's degree, and that was new. And so in order to serve our students, we had to provide them that opportunity. And so we went through this process of developing a 4+1 where the students in nutrition and dietetics would wind up with the requirements for going and becoming a dietitian as well as having a master's degree. And then a final example I'll bring up is in plant genetics. They were getting a lot of pressure from industry that they wanted their professionals in these different businesses to have the opportunity to get a master's in plant genetics. And so they developed a 4+1 there that allowed that kind of an opportunity. And actually it opened it up so that people that were actually working at the time could work on their master's and get that as well. So I guess that those are the examples. I wanted to point out the intentionality and how very much we do take this seriously. We're proud of the curriculum that we develop. We're proud of the students and the education that comes from our different majors in CFANS and across the university. And I'm certainly available for questions.
Thank you, Associate Dean White. I know that we have one region in particular who's going to start us off, but let me know if others want to make comments or ask questions. Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. In general, I think change is a good thing, and it sounds like you're thinking at least a little bit market-based. But I continue to look at the CFANS numbers in terms of the students that are coming there, and it's hard to understand exactly what's going on, but the numbers aren't going up as much as I think they should or could. And all I hear about is all these other schools that are attracting Minnesota kids because they can't get what they need here for some reason. And that just leads me to kind of perhaps a disconnect in the process that you just described and, the market realities, which is, trying to fill up the school. I mean, I think, I think maybe you've got about 375 freshmen coming in this year. And that just seems very small to me since we've grouped all these various programs together into CFANS. And just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Associate Dean White.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the board, Regent Shu. I have to be careful how I answer it because one of my goals as an associate dean is I want to grow the college, right? We've had this conversation, and we do believe that CFANS is a place that students want to be. Not to delay answering your question, but CFANS, when you look at our graduating class, more than 50% of our graduates didn't start in CFANS. They find us because we have the degrees that they want, but they don't necessarily start in CFANS. So we are out there advertising, and a lot of times the freshman class doesn't necessarily represent the final class. We are we want to be, and we are very attentive to the needs of industry and market desires. And we are working very hard to recruit students from greater Minnesota, from rural areas. We have a number of new programs that are aimed at that because we are concerned about the same things you are. It's difficult to compete with, with other universities that are nearby, even reciprocity universities, where the cost of attendance is lower. And so one of the things we've done is we've developed this land-grant legacy scholars program, which is aimed at rural students, and it's $20,000 scholarship, and it's meant to essentially offset some of that difference. We believe that the degrees that we have in CFANS are of, I'll just say it, of higher quality than some of our competitors. And we don't want that financial barrier to be the reason students don't come. We are working on the environment in the college, and we think we have a really good, welcoming environment. A lot of students we are having a hard time recruiting because we're in the big city. And there's very little we can do about that except make the environment, get them on campus, show them that this is a really welcoming and welcoming place, and that CFANS is, if you especially go to St. Paul campus, it's a very, very green and peaceful campus. So I would say that I think our degrees are the degrees the students want because we get so many students transferring in. I think that we are trying to grow, and I think that we are share your concerns and that we don't know why we aren't growing as fast as we think we should be, but it's something we do take seriously and really want to do.
Regent Anderson.
Well, thank you, Regent Amari. I'll just follow up with that answer. You know, I come from the western third of the state, and there is a culture difference from where I come from and the Minneapolis-St. Paul campus. And hard as I try to get the CFANS type students to the University of Minnesota, there's a tremendous pull from the states to our west, not far away. And you also said there's a cost difference there too, but part of it is culture. I will thank you, since I've been here, the Land Grant Legacy Scholarship is helping. That's something I thank President Kaler for helping with. We told him about our issues in rural Minnesota, and I think he came up with that. So that's just my answer to Regent Hsu. My question, when I look at the students, I look at the numbers. I'm just asking this. Minnesota Morris and Minnesota Rochester, we must put a higher percentage of those students into graduate and professional programs than the other schools. Would that be fair to say? The other outstate? Just looking at the numbers. I look at like biology degrees and chemistry degrees, and I would guess those people are going to graduate school.
Probably, or professional school, medical school, things like that, yes.
Okay.
I would guess so.
So that was just an observation I had, and I think kind of tells what kind of students we draw out there. They're good, high achievers. Finally, I guess when I look at the cost, and one of the things we are really worried about in greater Minnesota is cost of education. And I sit here and I'm thinking, wow, it's been that way since I was in school. What is and now we've got PSEO and current enrollment, our 3-year graduation rates are growing faster than ever before. I think part of that is a financial issue to many families. They want to get credits before they come. What is the magic about 120 credits for a degree? Why not 110 or 130? I mean, I'm guessing if I was a business major, I could probably do just as good in business if I missed 10 credits of FIAD or health or something like that. So what is and what is the history of that, and why have we never ever looked and said, is that the right number? So I guess that is my question. What is the magic of 120 credits?
Should I attempt?
We'll probably go to Provost Hanson on this one, but I mean, we all did it. We turned out to be wonderful people. We need that 120. Provost Hanson.
Chair Amari and Regent Anderson. There's no magic about it, but when you think, the curriculum design often begins with a thought about what kinds of things you expect an educated person to know or to be able to do. And you could see the categories in which faculty in curriculum design tend to place these things. Kind of a general education, or what here is often called the liberal education, the degree requirements themselves, and then a little bit of room for exploration through electives. The schools here, and particularly I want to credit the College of Science and Engineering here, have worked assiduously to try to meet the expectations of what it is we expect an educated person to be able to do and to know in order to participate as a citizen, as well as to have gainful work and that variety of things, and meet the expectations of the outside world with respect to those who are certified in particular majors as being able to perform in a certain profession. The pinch point is often, we've had to work assiduously to get down to 120 credits for a degree in a lot of the engineering fields, because the ABET requirements are extremely detailed and stringent, and there are a lot of them. But when you want your bridges built by people who actually take all those courses and learn all those things. So part of it has to do with what the credits mean in terms of credentializing knowledge. And so, there's no magic about it. I'm not saying, you couldn't do it if you had 110 degrees. But people aren't looking to pad these with wasteful things. They're thinking, what should somebody be able to do and to know if we're to say that they are competent electrical engineers, for example? So there's no magic about it, but it's a thoughtful process.
It's just thinking outside the box from my realm. Just because we've done something, I mean, I understand the answer, and I might need 180 credits, and they still won't think that I'm. But
well,
but I mean, I just thinking outside the box and wherever we're going. I just think it's good to think that way once in a while. So I'm not asking for just a great answer, but I mean, you explained it. You explained.
Chair Omari and Regent Anderson, I think, I guess I certainly agree, and I think one of the reasons we're seeing more of some proliferation, and we're kind of encouraging certificates of various sorts, is because there are other ways of bundling useful credentials and segments of study at the university. And so there are a lot of creative things that can be done in order to produce the citizens who can do or will know certain things. And again, there's no magic to it, but it is pretty standard throughout U.S. higher education.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Regent Rocha, please.
Thank you, Chair Omari. And I would note that for those of us that came through in the quarter system, 120 didn't get you there. So
yeah, that's right.
The change does occur frequently, Regent Anderson, if you consider frequently, about once every 50 years. So we'll keep that conversation going. Dean White, you're sort of subject to the focus. All of a sudden, we're talking about this broader issue, and now we're all of a sudden talking about CFANs. But it does, I think, it's illustrative, I think, of a lot of the things that we try to address. And we talk about the cultural differences. That's the same conversation from 30 years ago when I was looking at schools, and the phrase that was bandied about was "you can't grow corn on concrete." It was the argument for people saying that they weren't going to come into the Twin Cities to go to an agricultural college, but then when you came here, you certainly realized that you became your own community, and it certainly would stand up to any experience from any school. And we talk about the cost differential, we talk about recruitment with respect to this, and where I think this is really relevant to me is the broader question about when we talk about changes in our academic offerings and the degrees that we offer. This is one of the most fascinating reports that we get every year because it shows the change in the world. We're discontinuing a Latin program and a Greek program, which a couple generations ago would have been considered staples, and now they're being replaced, and it's interesting to see what they're being replaced with. And you look at a lot of these things and you say, well, what's the balance between giving people an opportunity to pursue something of interest to them and get a good liberal education, but at the same time also finding degrees that are going to be practical and actually give somebody an opportunity, whether they want to go to graduate school or whether they want to go out and get employment. I used to maintain that if you narrow the category enough to something where I'm the only person participating, I can be the world champion. For 5'7" males riding 4-year-old Morgan horse mares, I was the best there was in 1985. And so, ensuring that we don't just get so individualized that people are just kind of going through the motions and not really getting sort of the education that they need, that's, I think, a natural tension that we're always going to face because those demands are going to be there. But then I also look at, to what extent is this a purely academic conversation about what should be offered as a degree versus what is a marketing decision? With CFANs, one of the things that's come up over and over again over the several years that I've been back to the board is that we don't offer an agronomy degree. Now, if we speak to your college and to your colleagues in the college, they'll say, but we do. It's in plant science, and it's got a different name. However, it feels like we're a little ahead of the curve. The rest of the world is not there. Over and over again, I'm hearing from people that they've got sons and daughters that are interested in agronomy, but the university doesn't offer an agronomy degree. And it's too hard, I think, for us to have to expound, explain to everybody, but this is what we're offering. And so I'm not really sure how we measure that, how we find that balance. But those things have an impact. And I've heard it too many times to think that it's just sort of an isolated incident, that I think that those kinds of things do have an impact on our ability to compete with our neighbors to the west, as Regent Anderson discussed. The concept of the legacy scholarship, I like to the extent that we're identifying the problem of what our competition is for that particular cohort of students. I don't like the fact that it's funded by other students. It's a little bit like bailing into your own boat. And that's not CFANS doing it, but I mean, if the money came from the foundation, if it was philanthropy dollars, that's one thing, but it's being funded ultimately through the revenue that the university receives between the state and tuition. And so, but the concept is, I think, important. But the final thing is, and this is what I get over and over again, if you want to talk about these specific curricular offerings, and again, I know this is morphed a little bit from the original conversation. Kids aren't getting accepted. They're not being accepted. Students that you've made this statement before. When I went to college and I was college of ag, back when it was the institute, before it merged into a single college. Most of the folks that I went to school with, they graduated from high school with a 2.8 to a 3.4. There were a few exceptional individuals, and they had, anything from a 20 to a 26 ACT. Some of them were, superstars, and there were a couple 30s and 32s. And they took 4 years to graduate, sometimes 5 if they went home to plant every spring, because we were on the quarters and you could do that. And then they went home and employed half the township, and they were big university supporters, and they dreamed of their kids coming to the university. Well, now their students who aren't, my kids are in a suburban district. They're going to spend 4 years studying for the ACT, when they're in high school. Well, sometimes rural communities, that's not the reality. And yet they're perfectly competent. They're very talented students. They've got a different kind of wisdom and intelligence. And then we turn around and not admit them. And I've gotten too many of those calls in the last 3 years about people wanting to come to the university. They want their sons and daughters to come here. And so they go to South Dakota. They go to North Dakota. And so I think it's a combination of all these things that are having an impact on these programs. And the reason that I raise that in this context is those other decisions that we're making that have an impact can artificially impact what we see as demand for a certain kind of curricular offering. Well, people aren't interested in this because look at what enrollment is. But there are other things that are affecting that enrollment, and that if we took away some of these barriers to people having access to those programs, we would see that there still is high demand for certain kinds of programs. And I want to get that on the record because, again, I'm hearing it over and over again, and hopefully in other contexts, particularly as we talk about some broader strategy for the university, I hope those are things that we can address, and I certainly welcome any comments that you'd have in response.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. I'd point out that demand is one piece of this, of the ways in which we decide which programs to keep or adjust on and so forth, but there are several other things that would play into there as well. So your point is taken as a component of it. If you have any comments that you want to make, I'll turn to you. Otherwise, we'll move on to Regent Johnson, keeping the conversation specifically to this discussion about programmatic reviews, approvals, so on and so forth. So Associate Dean Winey, looks like you want to comment quickly.
Chairman Omari, I would like to comment, if that's okay, Regent Rocha and members of the board. So you brought up a number of things, and we share the concerns that you're talking about. With agronomy, we've heard the students. We have created, because of that pressure, a track within plant science that says agronomy, so that it will show up on their final transcript. And so that's one way to address that. It's a little easier to explain. It isn't as easy as to say we have an agronomy degree. And we are, because of the very issue that we came to talk about, we don't have an agronomy degree because one of the reasons is because if we had instead of in CFANs having 12 or 13 majors, we had 20, you know, but then we would be having duplication of effort. We would be having the things that, you know, happening that I don't think we want to have happen. So we do have to, so you're right, in the plant sciences, we have horticulture there, we have agronomy there, and we have a number of other things. But we are trying to at least label them so the students can see them, and so it shows up on their diplomas or transcripts. With the land-grant legacy funding, I know that for CFANs, we are using development money for that. And so that is, we agree with you. We don't want other students to be paying for this. This is going to have to come from philanthropy. And the issue of acceptance, you know, again, we share that. I mean, we want these students here, and if they aren't getting accepted right away, then we work with our transfer advisors and counselors to get students here when, you know, after a year or two somewhere else. But it is something that, you know, I share all of your concerns. We are trying to address them. That's why I wanted to comment, was just to let you know that we are mindful of them. We're working on them, and we really look forward to working together with you all to help.
Thank you. Regent Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up Regent Anderson and Regent Rocha, and this is about perception and culture from greater Minnesota. I don't live too far from Regent Anderson, about 75 miles from South Dakota. And this is not sitting here beating you up, but there's perceptions that people and potential students have about the university and CFANs. And I would offer this: if we could de-urbanize CFANs a bit and put a little something under our fingernails and not be quite as fancy. What am I getting at? I had a family talk to me. Their one son went to the University of Minnesota, was an all-state wrestler, had a brother, all-state wrestler, came here for an interview, came home, and they called me and they said, I don't think that the University of Minnesota wants our son. I said, why is that? Well, South Dakota has more to offer and he feels more comfortable, and there seems to be more of an agricultural farming attitude in South Dakota. All of you who are familiar with the ag and farming economy, as everything in life, it is changing so rapidly from day to day, you can't hardly keep track of it. There is stress in the countryside in economics and pricing and commodities. And so these young students are trying to figure out how to go to university, college, and go back on the farm in ag economics and agronomy and research and those kind of things. My point is, as you review the curriculum and admission standards, I would offer, why don't we embed ourselves and ask students at South Dakota State, North Dakota State, why did you choose those two institutions? You're from Minnesota as opposed to the University of Minnesota. I think it'd be very instructive as to why. And again, I'm not sitting here, Dr. White, Provost, beating you up. I'm trying to make an analysis of why this happens, because when I hear someone say, well, I go to South Dakota State, where do you live? Well, I live in Minnesota. We don't like to hear that because we know they're relatively good students. I don't know their GPA or their ACT test scores, but I think we have to change our mindset about CFANs and agriculture, agricultural economics, and those things. These folks are not studying to be architects. They're not studying to be whatever. These are studying to go back to the farm. And to go back to the farm is not a bad thing. Okay? So I don't know the answer, but to kind of change the attitude or the culture about it, I think is extremely important. And I agree with Regent Hsu and with you, Dean White, about admitting more students into CFANs. Now that has a cost of faculty and facilities and all. But I think Minnesota's an agricultural state. We forget that sometimes. It's driven by agriculture, among other things. So I would like to see us, another 100 or 200 ag students. Talk to the 4-Hers, talk to the FFA students, and so on and so forth.
And our student representative, who doesn't live too far from me, she's nodding her head in the affirmative, and I'm done with my Thursday morning homily. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. I'd imagine that there's several reasons why someone might go somewhere else, and the reason why we attract folks here folks might be saying, why didn't you go to South Dakota? And it's because the fit was here at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities campus. So there's probably a bit of back and forth on that. I'm going to end with one question for you all. And I'm wondering, as far as the approval process goes, how long does it usually take? And I mean, is there a time frame that you plan for? Is it an academic year? And then as we respond to markets, are there ever exceptions where we know we want to launch this program by, X date? Whether we start later than we would have, is there an exception that we can go through to make sure that it's being advertised with enough time to recruit?
Chair Omari and members of the board, the time is variable, but we can't, and we don't exactly have exceptions to the vetting process, but people can move with alacrity because it's not as if there are particular points of the calendar year where things have to go through, say, a committee. So if people hustle with the consultative process and there are quick sign-offs from everybody, they can move through very quickly. Again, Emily in my office is sort of oversees these as they pass through to make sure that they have the right consultation given the character of the degrees. And some don't require as many sign-offs because they're so distinctively within a particular, remit of a college. But the time frame really varies depending a bit on the push from the school.
And also, Chairman Omari and board, also we have the means to test things. So we do have these ways with courses and even programs where we can have special problems. We can go through kind of a very rapid process and then we can test them. We see how they work. And then we can do that for 2 years and then we have to solidify them into a course with a designator and things like that. So I think we have some of the flexibility I think you're aiming at, but but it is an arduous process to get it all the way through to you.
Great. Thank you to the presenters. There were some other members of the board that were hoping to comment, so this is clearly a conversation that we need to continue having. So I look forward to doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next up on the agenda is part one of a series that will span several months in meetings over the next academic year. We've titled this first one, Graduate and Professional Education Part 1, Post-Baccalaureate Education at the University of Minnesota, and this is a discussion item. Provost Hanson will be joined by Vice Provost Landian, who's the Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education. And by way of introduction, I mentioned earlier that this is the first of a series of conversations. And over the past several years, we've rightfully so focused significantly on undergraduate education. And now this year, we're going to turn to graduate and professional students and education, recognizing that 25% of our student body does come from this population. So it's an important area to focus, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time on that. So I'll turn it over to Provost Hanson and Vice Provost Lanyon.
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the committee. As Chair Omari mentioned, we're going to be kind of laying a foundation for this series today. I would just want to preface what we say today with a few remarks on the distinctions that we are drawing between graduate and professional education, which are the two basic categories of post-baccalaureate education. We draw that distinction for the purpose of clarity and administrative focus. We know it isn't a distinction that looms large for all of our various audiences or for all of the alumni of our programs. It is, however, a basic distinction made by most of our peer institutions in the U.S. Excuse me. I'll try to sketch why the distinction is salient, then give you a general outline of how we administer these two types of programs and why the differences in administrative approaches are appropriate. I'll also try to give you a sense, thank you, of the scale of the postgraduate enterprise, which the chair just adverted to. I want to say a little bit about how big it is on both sides of what we take to be a basic conceptual or administrative divide. After the general sketch, I'll describe our proposed schedule of topics for the remaining presentations in this series, including matters that I know you have expressed interest in, issues connected with funding the post-baccalaureate enterprise. We also want to make time at the end of today's presentations to solicit your thoughts about other topics you might want included in this year's series on this general topic. We have a basic outline in mind, but it's obviously subject to your will. So I'll make some general remarks to orient the discussion, and then I'll ask Scott Lanyon, the Vice Provost and Dean of Graduate Education, to elaborate on the distinction between graduate and professional education, with particular emphasis on the graduate side of that, the graduate education. To begin the explanation of our administrative distinction, I offer this slide to convey a rough sense of which degrees align where. Your docket includes the university's post-baccalaureate degrees presented in two tables, one for graduate education and one for professional education. This slide is a simpler presentation in which you can see that graduate education includes every PhD degree at the university, the Doctor of Music Arts, the Doctor of Juridical Science, as well as most Master of Science and Master of Arts programs. All the professional doctorates are listed, as well as a sampling of the master's degrees. You're certainly familiar with the professional doctorates, the JD, the MD, the Doctor of Pharmacy, and the Doctor of Dentistry. They used to be called the first professional degrees. There are many professional master's degrees. However, that might not come as quickly to mind as these so-called first professional degrees, but there are things like the Master of Architecture, Master of Social Work, Master of Public Affairs, Master of Education, Master of Public Health. Sorting post-bac education into these two basic groups, even though particularly on the professional side there is great heterogeneity within each group, is helpful because it accords with some basic distinctions in the nature and structure of the degree work and the nature and location of standards for the degrees. The first group of degrees, on the left side of that table, involves traditional graduate education, where a major portion of the degree program involves research or creative activity. The group of professional degrees, on the right side, includes those programs whose graduates most often seek applied professional or practice-based employment in the fields named in the degrees. Two important points to keep in mind throughout this discussion. First, while the distinction between the two groups involves differences in curricular structure and degree requirements, program benchmarks, student career objectives, and so on, both graduate and professional education are highly valuable and are defining features of the University of Minnesota. Both are essential to the university's impact on the state and nation, as well as its standing as a world-class institution. Second, the line between professional and graduate education is an administrative artifact. And not only does it have fuzzy edges, it also oversimplifies somewhat the distinction between the two endeavors. There are necessary and important professional aspects to graduate education, just as there are elements of graduate education, particularly those connected with research and discovery, that are essential to professional education and practice. Still, there is a basic distinction of primary purpose that makes this broad administrative distinction pertinent and useful. What is that basic distinction? We might cast it as a difference in terms of the primary objectives of graduate and professional education. With graduate education, students are expected to acquire deep knowledge of a discipline and then be able to use that knowledge, both the content and the methodologies that are characteristic of the discipline, to create new knowledge and perhaps also to challenge existing understanding. Professional students, on the other hand, gain mastery of existing knowledge that they can then apply expertly and creatively to the practice, the work that is distinctive of those professions. Because of this basic difference in objectives, a major portion of the graduate degree programs is focused on research or creative activity and original scholarship. Professional degrees involve mastering bodies of knowledge, techniques and tools of inquiry that will sustain the practice of that expertise in some more or less specific realms of endeavor, most often outside the academic or research environment. The specific learning goals for professional degrees are shaped heavily by the profession. In other words, by the expectations and scope and character of the work that's characteristic of being a member of that profession. Because this is the case, close relationships among faculty, students, and the professional communities, businesses, industries, and institutions in which professional skills are deployed are quite important. So, for example, faculty leading our Master of Architecture degree know well the Twin Cities architecture community. Faculty in the Humphrey School meet and work with a variety of relevant nonprofits, and many of our education faculty are connected with our educational leaders and practitioners across the state. Faculty engage with those practicing in the relevant professions, in part in order to monitor, respond to, and help shape change in their respective professional practice. Graduate education, however, is shaped more clearly by the discipline itself or by those working on related questions or problems at universities and other research hubs around the world. This is a subtle distinction because it speaks in terms of connectedness in a variety of ways, but it is a distinction that's in fact fundamental. So these general differences in learning objectives and goals do affect the curricula and requirements characteristic of the two groups of degree types. Professional students often need to acquire specific skills or competencies to be successful, to be able to practice in their career. If we consider some of the professional degrees, such as a Master of Business Taxation, Master of Social Work, or Public Health, it's clear that there are particular sets and ranges of knowledge those degrees certify. Because that's the case, the curriculum and the requirements are often very clearly delineated. Graduate education, on the other hand, builds curricula discipline by discipline, but in a way that incorporates a ramp up to an individual springboard, a jumping off point for individual research and discovery. Degree requirements may seem more open and flexible on the graduate side, but they should be structured to prepare the student to contribute to what I remember at my graduate institution was said to be the sum total of human knowledge. That was what your dissertation was supposed to add to by doing original research and presenting it in the dissertation. Given these general differences in educational objectives and goals, we should expect differences in program milestones. Graduate students typically move through distinct phases. First, coursework, and in some disciplines, field work or lab work, but then the written or oral preliminary exams, what are known as prelims. They're comprehensive exams over the field. Those come after the completion of coursework and usually, in addition to that coursework, concerted independent study. Passage of preliminary exams, which are basically meant to ensure that the student knows the general field or discipline, is marked as advancement to candidacy. And then a student focuses on independent research formalized in the writing of a thesis or dissertation. The final point for grad education is a formal oral defense of that dissertation, conducted by a group of professors with relevant expertise. The thesis examination committee includes, but it extends beyond the dissertation advisor. On the other side, the professional side, the students need to pass not only university examinations, but also examinations overseen by the larger profession, such as the bar exams of the various states, which are intended to determine whether a candidate is qualified to practice within a given jurisdiction. Or there's also a uniform bar exam, which is accepted by a number of states. But in general, there are certification processes that lie outside the university. Professional students, after they've finished their university work, typically have to obtain specific licensures, such as a license to practice law, or an accounting license for CPAs, or a teacher's license. And again, licensing typically requires passage of an exam structured and overseen by a profession or a state or another governmental entity. Another distinct difference between graduate and professional education is the clarity of the career path. For professional students who aspire to be, for example, dentists or counselors or teachers or nurses, physical therapists, urban planners, there's an established professional identity to which the student aspires, and it's often clearly tied to a desired career. The situation is somewhat different for graduate students. For them, there's a clear discipline and a scholarly community, but the exact career path that's the follow-on from their studies and degree is quite variable, and students within a single program may be aiming at many different career paths. Higher education, certainly, but also industry, government service, the arts, nonprofit work, and so on. These differences in the careers and in the relationships with their relevant or aspirational professional communities also help explain differences in the nature and structure of quality assurance and oversight. On the graduate side, quality assurance rests largely on the university faculty and faculty administrative structures. Faculty expertise is, of course, at the heart of the disciplines, but it's also crucial that faculty expectations of students and institutional and disciplinary expectations of faculty evolve as the disciplines evolve. So it's a complex interplay there with a number of features that shape what's expected. This latter point is true, of course, of professional education as well, but professional education also has other formal forces playing a role in quality assurance. Explicit professional standards, often codified in accreditation rules, are in play. There are literally hundreds of specialized professional accreditation standards shaping our University of Minnesota programs today. On almost any given day on campus, there will be professional accreditors here examining our programs. This aspect of the balance, or really the lineaments of external versus internal quality assurance, excuse me, is an important distinction, at least for administrative purposes. So it's something I'm going to refer back to in a few minutes when I talk more explicitly about the differences in our University of Minnesota administrative structure for post-baccalaureate education. First, excuse me, a few numbers to give you a sense of the proportional divisions in our University of Minnesota student body. This slide shows the number of University of Minnesota students seeking a post-baccalaureate degree compared to our undergraduate and non-degree students. As you can see on this slide, 25% of our students are graduate or professional students. I mean, that is something that is very distinctive of this university in the state. And in fact, even compared to many of our peers, we have a larger percent of our effort put into graduate and professional education than many other first-rate AAU institutions. On this slide, you'll see the number of graduate and professional students as well as the number of degree programs on each side of that distinction. That, of course, was information that was also in your docket. But let me remind you of the general features that lead to the categorization that we're making here. Programs and the students in them are grouped on the graduate education side if the programs involve original research or creative activity and original scholarship, include a requirement of a dissertation or thesis that constitutes or reports original scholarship or research, or if they include a requirement of a thesis examination and committee. Professional education programs generally involve students whose primary objective upon completion is to acquire an applied professional or practice-based job outside of the typical academic or research environment, explicit codes of professional ethics or principles that are established by the particular industry or profession, covering matters pertinent to practice in the field, quality or performance standards that are enforced by a professional association or accreditation body, and often requirements of professional licensure or passage of an exam in order to practice. So, There are broad and general differences in goals, objectives, and relationships with external entities that can be usefully applied to organize an administrative division between the two groups of degrees and programs. Drawing the general division is key to finding the right level of oversight and accountability for postgraduate education within the university. Both the central university administration and the schools and departments have roles to play here in oversight. At the University of Minnesota, I'll just give you a little bit of history and why right now we have this division that we do. In 2009, a decision was made to implement a major restructure of the graduate school. This was before I came, but I understand that the main objective of this restructuring was to shift the locus of cost control and major decision-making to the schools and colleges away from central offices. President Kaler began his term soon after this restructuring, and I came to Minnesota about a year later. I understand that a number of good things emerged from this process. For example, an improved set of post-baccalaureate education policies. There was, for example, a new leave of absence policy that was adopted across the university. And many paper processes of record keeping and certification were pushed to electronic systems because this was more widely distributed. There was greater local control of the content of degree programs, and by and large, that's where the expertise resides, so that seemed appropriate as well. But when I arrived here, in fact, when I was interviewing for the job here, I also heard complaints about the restructuring. In fact, in one of the interviews, people said to do something about having dissolved the graduate school. And I thought, what? You know, there's not a graduate school here. There's no graduate. And it was sort of a little alarming. But the campus, you continue to discuss that restructuring. And as I say, some good things came out of it, but there was also clearly a desire for more central leadership and assistance on matters connected with planning, programmatic review, and best practices in recruitment, advising, and so on for graduate programs. So because that was the case, and because things hadn't entirely settled down from the first restructuring, I undertook a cooperative and consultative process of reorganizing post-baccalaureate education. And in 2015, we completed a schematic alignment of our graduate and professional programs, guided by the rationales that I've described to you in the beginning of this session. And I refocused our central administrative support accordingly. Today, in our administrative operations, we recognize the need for a formal graduate school, one that works with and shares responsibilities for graduate education with the colleges, along with the need for continuing administrative support, now directly from the provost's office, for the various professional education communities that are most directly supported and overseen by the schools. So in some sense, again, the locus of attention for the professional degrees is more firmly rooted in the schools which offer those degrees. And the graduate school, it's now shared, but there is once again a strong graduate school. Graduate education is served by this graduate school with its own strong dean who is charged with oversight of graduate programs and fostering excellence in those programs. Programs that, again, involve centrally research and creative activity. Professional education needs less central support and oversight, given the character of the degree programs, the career clarity, the professional identity, and the strong oversight of those programs by accrediting associations. It's still appropriate and useful to foster ties across the wide range of heterogeneous programs that constitute professional education on our campus, however. For that reason, we've instituted a professional education council. The council is still evolving, but it's connected directly to me and my office, and it includes representatives from all the colleges with professional programs. It's charged with identifying and communicating or addressing key issues for professional education. I also want to note that the two baccalaureate student government groups happily came to the same conclusion I did about the appropriateness of the 2015 reorganization. Maybe there was a different dynamic at play there, but nonetheless, they ended up in the same place. They reorganized themselves into two separate but usually cooperative groups, and their way of drawing boundaries aligns perfectly with our administrative model. So that's my broad, quick overview, which I hope is helpful. In the months ahead, we'll drill down into some specific issues concerning post-baccalaureate education. In October, we plan to focus on, among other things, tuition and financing, enrollment management, and student recruitment, as well as diversity issues, the roles of fellowships, TAs and RA-ships, and student debt. And in December, we had planned to discuss the impacts and outcomes of graduate education. And in February, you all will be working on the impacts and outcomes of professional education on the university, on the state, and also on the region and the world. We plan to include hard data on employment and on quality measures. So that's what we had planned, but again, we'll come back to that. But for now, for the second part of today's introductory session, I wanted to ask Scott Lanyon, who is the Dean of Graduate Education, to hone in on that side of the bifurcation and talk about support for and directions in the graduate school, and to convey his vision of the role of that office.
Thank you, Provost Hanson, Chair Omari, members of the committee. To continue this effort to help you see the distinction between both professional and graduate education, I'd like to provide you with a way to think about post-baccalaureate education that I found helpful to sort of communicate these differences. So we can think about post-baccalaureate education in terms of the amount of time students spend in mastering existing knowledge, the vertical axis here, and the time actually creating new knowledge, creative activities, and communicating knowledge along the horizontal axis. The diagonal here then is the ways that students could combine those activities and how much time they would spend in each. At one extreme, you could have students spending full time, 100% of their time, really mastering knowledge in courses, internships, and things like that. The other extreme would be totally in the creative realm, doing research, creating creative activities, and communicating that knowledge, with many students somewhere in between. And in fact, post-baccalaureate education at the University of Minnesota really spans nearly this full range. And it's an interesting way of thinking about this because I think it helps us to see the distinction between the various kinds of students we have on campus. So students in professional programs spend the majority of their time mastering this existing knowledge. But there's variability. It's important to recognize that some of our professional programs do have an expectation of creating knowledge, communicating knowledge, and so on. So that's why we've represented it this way. Graduate students then are over the rest of this diagonal line. And it's interesting because graduate students sort of represent a transitional phase, sort of an apprenticeship. They come here initially to master knowledge, but while they're here, we expect them to actually transition into scholars themselves and to being productive scholars and contributing to the university. Research master students, early in their career, spending a lot of their time in coursework, reading original literature, or really emphasizing this mastering of knowledge, but they are beginning to get involved with research, other creative pursuits, and communication of that to various audiences. Our early career PhD students, also taking coursework, but spending significantly more time with the original literature, learning how to do research, gaining those skills, and beginning to be involved as scholars themselves. And finally, more advanced PhD students are really past taking coursework for the most part, and are really spending the majority of their time in research and creating and communicating knowledge. I'll point out, none of our students are 100% at that end of the spectrum because they're always mastering the existing knowledge, right? We're always reading original literature and so on. So in this presentation, when I talk about graduate students, what I'm focusing in on are these students pursuing a research master's degree or the PhD. Now, one of the common misconceptions about graduate education is that it exists primarily to train the next generation of faculty. The reality is that less than half of our graduate students will end up pursuing careers in academia. In fact, as Provost Hanson mentioned, our graduate students are pursuing an incredibly wide diversity of career paths. And this leads to a very interesting sort of feature of graduate education that I'd like to illustrate with this next sort of conceptual set of slides. You can think about the way we do graduate education as being a combination of imparting great depth of knowledge in a discipline, so that's sort of the vertical axis here, as well as breadth of knowledge, so how broadly trained are students. And one educational approach that we can imagine is to provide students with exposure to a wide variety of disciplines as shown in that bar across the top. So it's relatively shallow introduction to a wider range of disciplines. These would be more of a generalist, students capable of many things, maybe, but not expert in any one particularly. This is actually, in many ways, the philosophy of our liberal education credits for undergraduate students, that we want students to be broadly educated. We don't do this much in post-baccalaureate education. We have a different model. In many of our post-baccalaureate programs, they're I-shaped, if you will. So, relatively narrow set of disciplines and skills that students are being educated in, but very deep knowledge. This is true of many of our professional programs, where, as the provost mentioned, the program is preparing students for particular career paths. Many people tend to think of graduate education the same way if you have that misconception that students are being trained to be faculty in that discipline, but as I just mentioned, that's not true of the majority of our students. So, in fact, where graduate education is going is really quite interesting. It's what we're calling T-shaped students, T-shaped graduate education. So yes, there's great disciplinary knowledge in their focused discipline, but there's also an effort to impart a breadth of experience as well. So when I talk about T-shape, I'm talking about making sure that our students, graduate students, again, have the opportunity to gain some level of knowledge and expertise in multiple disciplines, to become interdisciplinary scholars. But I'm also referring to the desire of our graduates to have many, what we would call transferable skills, the ability to communicate effectively with different audiences, to work in teams, to be multiculturally competent, to manage projects, to be leaders, and so on. Increasingly, it's the deep disciplinary knowledge that gets our graduates job interviews, but it's actually these transferable skills that tend to get them job offers. That's what's setting our students apart. It's what we hear from industry all the time. This is what we need, the great disciplinary knowledge, but we need them to be able to function in these spaces and communicate well and so on. So to summarize, who are our graduate students? They're people who are becoming experts in their disciplines. They're gaining additional interdisciplinary knowledge and expertise. They're learning transferable skills that allow them to apply their knowledge in a diversity of career paths. And while they're here, they're heavily involved in the generation and communication of new knowledge. Beyond the description of who they are, I think it's important for you to know how important they are to the University of Minnesota and what they contribute to the university. Quite simply, graduate students help us, are significant assistance in helping us accomplish our mission. So if you think about our tripartite mission, and this is the way it shows up on at least one of our web pages, and you'll see each one of these starts with the word we. We seek new knowledge, we prepare students, we apply our expertise. In each of those cases, graduate students are a significant component of the we. They really make it possible for us to do this work. First and foremost, every graduate student is contributing to our research mission through their own original research. Something that's maybe less obvious to you is that they're really vital in helping our faculty to be more productive as researchers. Graduate students not only increase faculty productivity by helping them to collect, analyze, and interpret data, they also challenge faculty intellectually. Graduate students are one of the major forces that help our faculty stay on the cutting edge of their discipline. They challenge the faculty. Second, graduate students make a significant contribution to our undergraduate teaching mission. Graduate students teach many of our lab and recitation sessions in freshman and sometimes sophomore level courses. Graduate students are ideally suited to operate in that space. In many cases, they've just recently learned the material that they're now teaching. So they have a great ability to identify with the students, the undergraduate students, and the challenges they're having in mastering that knowledge. So that's one. Equally important, many of our undergraduate students are actually hesitant to approach faculty and to admit that they're struggling with the material. It's much easier for them to talk to the graduate students. And one of the things we tend to forget is that our undergraduate students know that the faculty teaching these courses are world experts in these disciplines. It's kind of daunting to think about going to that faculty member and admitting that they're struggling with that material. It's much easier for them to talk to graduate students. So graduate students are really essential in this undergraduate mission. Finally, graduate students play an important role in the university's outreach mission. Many of our students work with faculty and on their own, both in local communities, across the state, nationally, and globally. Indeed, learning how to communicate complex ideas effectively to diverse communities, and maybe even more importantly, how to listen and learn from those communities, is a key aspect of graduate education. Bottom line, it's actually not possible to be a research university without a vibrant graduate education community. Graduate students are at the core of what we do as an institution. In many ways, a research university's stature is determined in part by the quality of its graduate programs generally and the reputation of the PhD programs specifically. So with that as background, what I'd like to do is talk briefly now about the role of the graduate school itself in this space. As Provost Hansen mentioned, this is a shared enterprise between the system office of the graduate school and the colleges and graduate programs. You heard from Associate Dean Mike Wright that in undergraduate education, colleges have an important role in defining curriculum, but there is some university standards, university requirements for an undergraduate curriculum. That's even less true in graduate education. The control of curriculum and those graduate experiences is very much a local matter in graduate education because it's important that those faculty are able to meet the needs of the discipline, of the employers in that space, and consequently, managing graduate education is very decentralized. And the result is that there's tremendous variability. It's very hard to get a grasp of what graduate education experience is at a research university because of the variability. Interestingly, it's this variability that characterizes U.S.-style graduate education that makes U.S.-style graduate education so globally valuable, why so many students wish to come here. So, in this space, the graduate school's role is one of support to help colleges and campuses to be effective in their efforts to deliver high-quality graduate education. To ensure that we have correctly identified how the graduate school can operate in this space, we've recently completed a strategic plan, and we've identified 4 strategic goals. First and foremost, it's diversity. It's critical that we assist programs in increasing the diversity of students receiving graduate degrees and postdoctoral training. And I'm not talking just about recruitment. It's about helping programs recruit students, but make sure that we have a welcoming environment, that they receive the graduate education that they desire, and they're prepared to pursue the careers that they're looking for. We advocate for, recognize, support, and reward excellence in graduate education and postdoctoral training. We increase innovation of best practices in graduate education and postdoctoral training. And as I indicated, we're about service. We are a service entity. We're here to partner with the colleges and campuses. Our goal is to provide consistently exceptional service to graduate students, postdoctoral scholars, graduate programs, colleges, and campuses. And I thought what I might do, just very briefly, is to just show you what we do. So these are the major offices within the graduate school. Just give you a flavor of how we are partnering. We have an Office of Graduate Student Initiatives. That's the office that plans and implements orientation to make sure, for graduate students, make sure our students are able to hit the ground running, so to speak. Works in collaboration with graduate programs, colleges, and so on to ensure that graduate students actually get those transferable skills that are so critical. 2016, a decision was made to house responsibility for postdoctoral scholars in the graduate school. So we have this postdoctoral initiatives office. We have a faculty initiatives office. This is the one that is working to provide faculty with the tools they need to be effective as advisors, both of graduate students and of postdoctoral scholars. We're also working, you may not know this, but the graduate programs are actually administered by a faculty member who we refer to as a director of graduate studies. Those faculty are doing this as an add-on to everything else they're already doing. One of the things that we're looking to do is to provide them with a toolkit, tools to help them be successful in that space. We have a diversity office involved in helping programs recruit, matriculate, retain, and graduate students from underrepresented populations. The graduate school offers an admissions office, so we manage admissions centrally for graduate programs. We actually make this available to the professional schools as well, and many of the professional programs take advantage of that service. It's much more efficient than colleges trying to replicate an admissions office in each one of the colleges. It's important for you to know, though, while we manage the sort of logistics of that, the decisions on admission are local decisions. We have a policy offer that monitors and updates graduate education policies, helps programs stay in compliance. We have a fellowship office that recognizes and rewards excellent graduate students by awarding competitive university-wide fellowships and also helping graduate students to prepare to apply for external, international, and nationally competitive fellowships. Finally, we have a data analysis office, and I'm going to end with this one because I want to elaborate on this one a little bit. This office, in collaboration with the Office of Institutional Research, is charged with gathering, analyzing, and interpreting graduate education data and then communicating that to our programs. It's critical that our deans, associate deans, directors of graduate studies have information to make informed decisions. It's not necessarily efficient for them to try to gather the data on their own and analyze the data, so that's a role that I feel is very important for the graduate school to fill. So in fact, we've recently embarked on an initiative to create online data dashboards for colleges that pulls together all the data that they need about graduate education. We're still in developing these. They'll be done and live by the end of the calendar year. These portals are going to provide data on such, and these are trend data, like the last 10 years. Information about numbers of applications, number of students admitted, number of offers accepted, number of master's students enrolled, number of PhD students enrolled, enrollment, numbers by gender identity, for domestic students, by ethnicity, citizenship, domestic versus international student, time to degree for master's student, time to degree for professional students, or PhD students. So the goal is to provide data here, including access to survey data, because, again, these programs are being managed locally. Our role is to help make sure that they have the information they need in order to do that well. I should also say that another one of our goals is to make sure that prospective students have access to the data that they need. So these portals, once we've finalized them, will actually be public so that prospective students have access to this information as well. So I hope that helps sort of gives you an introduction both to who graduate students are, how they're different from professional students, the role of the graduate school relative to the colleges. And the goal of this was to set the stage for the rest of the year, this deep dive into post-baccalaureate education. And as you can see from this slide, and Provost Hanson referred to this in her comments, we've outlined some of the things that we think you would want to know, that we think you should know in this space. But obviously this is fluid. We would love to hear from you. What else you would like us to cover in the upcoming meetings. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Provost Hanson.
Well, really, I just want to underscore what Scott just said. We're happy to entertain questions now about what we've presented, but we really would like to get your guidance on how you would like to see the rest of this series articulated.
Thank you to the presenter. So we see the discussion questions here, and really we want to focus the conversation now on The distinctions that were laid out by the presenters, differences between professional and graduate students, I think it's a great level set. And then the second item that we want to really focus on is the outline that was on the previous slide that showed the way that the year will progress and seeing if we're hitting the right topics and have the right things in there. So we'll turn first to Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Amari. Thank you, presenters. I had the privilege of obtaining my graduate degree here at the university. And throughout my graduate years, I didn't know what I was going to end up doing, whether I was going to go into academia, government, or industry. So the coursework, the research I did, the mentoring I had was very good, without exception. So, and over the years, I've also had the opportunity to hire many students from the university, graduate students, professionals, undergraduate students, plus other institutions around the country. So I've hired a lot of students. So what I'm about to say, this observation goes back to my own personal experience when I graduated and went into industry, plus students I've hired over the years. It took me about a year to be able to contribute to the industry, to learn this stuff. And I see it today. I'll hire the students, whether they're undergrads or graduates, and it takes me about a year to teach them what to do. And I'm just wondering if we're doing something to address that, looking at, I know we do some externships, I hire externs in my company, but as part of the curriculum, and also giving people an opportunity during the graduate, what is out there, what the industries are available to them, what it involves, and then make it part of the curriculum. Is there any thought along that line?
Chair Amari, Regent Simonson, and the rest of the committee, yes, we have a lot of work to do in this space. I think that one of the challenges, as I indicated, the diversity of careers that our graduates are pursuing is really wide, and it's changing really rapidly. That's one of the reasons people wish to hire people with graduate degrees. But it's a challenge for universities to figure out how to do not just the eye, not just that deep disciplinary knowledge, but to think creatively about what those transferable skills are, what's the interdisciplinary knowledge. The challenge I think that we're facing is that the curriculum is built around the discipline, and that's what the faculty are best positioned to do. I think increasingly graduate education will become a partnership between the graduate program faculty and the university more broadly to think about ways to provide some of these other transferable skills to develop externship opportunities as you've talked about. Because you're absolutely right. This is what we are hearing nationally. Employers are very happy generally with the disciplinary knowledge of graduate students. They just wish they had those other skills about how to manage a project, how to work on teams, how to work with diverse communities. So I won't say we're there, but we're well aware that that's the place that graduate education needs to go.
Regent Simonson.
Just a follow-up question. Maybe it's related to the college I graduated from, but I look at the faculty. Most of them came right out of graduate school. They had no industry experience. And I'm wondering, now there's a couple of people that I've seen make some contribution that had come from industry back into academia. Any thoughts along that line, or use an adjunct from industry or things like that?
So, Regent Simonson, I would say that there are two answers to that. One is that I think that the University of Minnesota specifically, I think academia more generally, have become much more open to the idea of hiring faculty who have a diversity of experiences, not just directly at a graduate school. And so you can look across the university in many, many different departments, and you will see people who have had industry experience. So that's one thing, and I think that's a trend that's likely to continue. The second piece, though, is that we do use adjuncts extensively for this purpose. Many programs are recognizing that if a student wishes to go off and, as a career, pursue a career in the nonprofit world, maybe the faculty in that department have no personal experience in such space, so they bring in faculty or adjunct faculty who their career is, or their career has been. So I think those are important. I think we need to challenge ourselves, and I'm challenging programs to think very creatively about how do we keep changing? Because the world is changing really rapidly, and the world in which our graduate students are attempting to use their degrees is changing rapidly.
Thank you.
Provost Hanson?
And may I just add, thank you, Chair Omari and Regent Simonson. That is, this is an issue that Vice Provost and Dean Lanyon has been particularly attentive to. He's being kind of modest about this, but because training within the schools of disciplines often is the kind of the I part, he's putting a lot of energy and attention into things that bring together graduate students from a variety of schools and departments to get some of these other skills and to learn some of the other things that might be expected in different kinds of careers. He's attentive to that issue about career paths, and he brings in speakers and so on. Often it isn't in his purview necessarily to bring them in as adjuncts within the department, but he brings them in and makes them available to students as they think about planning their careers.
Thank you, Provost Hanson. And I'm only going by names here that I'm reading, but I think that's Regent McMillan there with the nice beard that has come out. Regent McMillan, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and apologize for being late today. I have a couple comments, and then I think both comments, one related more broadly to the overall lineup of your committee's work plan. And if I had been here on time, I was going to comment on how nicely laid out it is to bring us to a point of a systemic and holistic look at the breadth of what we do in the education space here. And so as I answer that question, so kudos to committee leadership and to our provost and her leadership team for bringing this before us. And I think today is a perfect example of just how interrelated the undergraduate and the graduate side of this institution's mission is. And I'm particularly personally struck by the fact that we tend to segment undergraduate issues, whether it's a tuition conversation, whether it's the kind of thing that Regents Johnson and Rocha were raising about what are we offering, and they're not as segmentable as they really should be, because what you just closed with, Vice Provost Lanyon, was the fact that the quality and reputation of our school is in many ways driven by what's happening at the graduate level. Now, 7 years into this role, I should understand that, and I do, but today helps really bring it to light. So when we, as Regents, think about what are we going to do with this undergraduate issue, and we get to many more undergraduate issues than we do graduate, for whatever reason, we really shouldn't divorce it and put it in a corner and treat it as solely an undergraduate issue. We need to be looking to you and President Kaler and the team to help us understand exactly what happens when we do create a priority in the undergraduate world. How do we keep the quality? How do we keep the economics? How do we keep every bit of the deliverability of it going as it relates to the graduate side? So as I think about your questions here, one, I'm very excited about the lineup of this committee's work. So great, and today's a really good start. Number two, help us always understand the linkage between undergraduate and graduate and how you deliver the mission, because I tend to drive by the graduate side of that from time to time and get inordinately focused on what's the undergraduate outcome, whether it's admission, tuition, whatever it might be. Those are where the attention gets laid, but without graduate, we can't have the undergraduate success we have. So that's my takeaway. I don't know that there's a question or an answer there, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thanks. I think that's about the best presentation of the distinction and the rationale between graduate and professional education that I've heard. And so I want to commend you for that. And it was very, very clear and very helpful the way it was presented. And I see on the rest of the plan for the next few months that a lot of the questions I have will probably be addressed, but some of them are. that how do we decide what an appropriately sized graduate school is, or appropriately sized professional schools? Is 25% of our university student enrollment the appropriate balance to? And in that question, perhaps we could look at what some of our Big Ten peers do also in terms of graduates and professional size versus undergraduate size. And then a question that I'm just particularly interested in is kind of the length of time that it takes on average for people to get PhDs. I know there's a huge variation in that. So thank you again for the clarification, and those are some of the things I'd like to see addressed.
And I'll turn to the presenters if you want to mention anything that you think those questions will be answered along the way, or if you want to talk about any of those now, it's completely up to you.
Chair Omari and Regent Cohen, we will definitely talk about these along the way. I'm making notes about what you'd like to see included. So we'd like to focus on some of those things. We recognize that the issue of time to degree is extraordinarily important because there's often debt associated with a long time to degree, and quite a bit of effort has gone into that. And we can certainly supply data about the size matters that you mentioned. As I mentioned initially, the University of Minnesota has an extremely robust profile in graduate and professional education, and there are lots of reasons for that, but we probably want to set that in the right context.
Thank you. Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, presenters. I agree with the conversation we've had up to this point. I want to focus on Regent Simonson's comments because it is unique, maybe totally unique to have a regent who's been on the hiring side of our students, and obviously externships help sort of prepare students that are going to end up in industry. But I'd like to hear from Regent Simonson further sort of thoughts about what you find when we're hiring. If there is a year lag, is this sort of the issue? I know we're generalizing, and it's just you're just one employer out there, but is it time management? Is it what takes students? What's the challenge to take students out of academia and into an industrial setting of yours?
Regent Simonson, you're probably being put on the spot now, so why don't you list your maybe top 3 to 5 that come off the top of your head, and then we can continue having a conversation as you think more deeply.
Yeah, maybe unique to my industry, but I know part of it was really understanding applying the technology I had in a broad way to very specific topics. That was one of the issues. I don't know, we can talk more about it later, but it's a fact. I see it today, and it's not unique to the University of Minnesota. People I've hired out of Iowa State, out of Kansas State, out of Illinois, out of North Carolina, South Dakota. I mean, it's not unique to here, but I'd really like to see it change.
Well, we identified one of the problems. You're hiring people from other schools. Vice Provost Lania, did you want to make a comment in there?
Yes, Regent Omari. Actually, Regent Beeson, I'd like to respond to one aspect of what you were saying and actually go back to Regent Simonson's question. One of the other things, this is sort of more my dream of where we can be. It'll take us a little while to get there, but we're currently in a process of attempting to survey our graduate alumni. It's a process, it's a collaborative process with a number of other institutions that's geared to see where people with graduate degrees go, what kind of career paths. With that, at some point, I'm hoping that we have enough knowledge of where our alumni are that we can go back to them and say, now that you know the career you're in, what would you do differently? What advice do you have for us about what would really have helped you to hit the ground running in the career that you've now chosen? That's the kind of feedback that I think will be very helpful, and it's very helpful for faculty to hear exactly where their graduates are now. And I think that will help us. Again, I think it will end up being a partnership between changing the curriculum per se, as well as these broader offerings from the university, various offices on the transferable skills side.
That's really good. I'm very interested in what the results of that will be. We have two more regents, Regent Shu, and then we'll go to Regent Anderson for closing remarks.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. I can tell you I wouldn't be sitting here today. I may not even exist today had my father not come to graduate school at the University of Minnesota from Shanghai, China in 1948. I never understood why he came here until I asked him, why did you come here? And it turned out that the University of Minnesota had a great reputation in aerospace engineering in 1948, 47 when he applied. So I'm kind of looking at what you're telling me here and trying to understand what our reputation is today in all of the various areas, and I didn't see that in your list, so that's one thing that I'd like to see is how are we doing? And I know, for example, in the law school, we're struggling to find qualified students because we need to maintain a ranking. It kind of bothers me that that's what's contributing to the problems in the law school, is that we're trying to buy the ranking by attracting, it looks like maybe we're bouncing back this year, but I just looked at 3 years, the 3-year enrollment data, and it gone down significantly since 2015. So I'd like to understand better, are we having that same problem in other programs? Could we have more graduate students in some other programs? Are we oversubscribed in some areas and undersubscribed in other areas? I have heard anecdotal evidence that, for example, and this might be on your list here, but the fact that we don't provide the same financial packages as other schools, is causing a problem with attracting some students. And I'm not sure if that's a true statement or not, but I've heard it numerous times that where people I know have kids who have gone to other schools for graduate studies. They just said that we weren't very competitive in terms of the funding in those areas. And the other, I guess, so I would circle around I think your first strategic priority was diversity. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we're doing in that department compared to others, but I'd like to understand how we are doing. And I do think I think we do have a lot of diversity here, but I don't really know how to quantify it and compare it to other places. And I would also suggest, this is something I wanted to bring up in the last conversation, but I think, in terms of law schools, there are law schools now who are not requiring the LSAT anymore. So I look at that as kind of my test optional kind of approach that I wish that we would look closer at. And maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't work with the GRE as much in the other graduate programs, but certainly the MCAT, et cetera. I don't know what dentists do. But I think those are some other opportunities to look at. And the last thing I just want to focus on is a problem that impacts undergraduates, and that's the fact that this was a problem when I was in school, that you end up with TAs who are graduate students who don't speak English as well as they should in order to teach some of the subjects that they teach. And I don't know what the solution to that is. Apparently it's a problem at other schools as well, even to this day. But I think that's something that I'd like to understand more is what are the language requirements. I know that we would gladly take a brilliant researcher even if they aren't fluent in English for other reasons, because they're so hot in their field. And so I don't know how we look at that, and I'd like to understand how we can address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Great comments. Particularly around the funding and the diversity, I imagine it'll vary significantly by program. I know across the nation there are some programs that offer signing bonuses to graduate students. And I don't know if we even want to get into that conversation or into that world. But and then the last one is a relevant one, and it'll also vary because if they're teaching a Arabic class, then it might make sense if their English isn't very good, and we might not want them speaking English in the class anyways, right? So it'll, again, I think vary significantly by program, but good areas to raise, and we look forward to that. Regent Anderson is going to bring us home before we transition to the next item.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and I'm, I guess, glad to be last. I don't really have questions, but observations. Elani, I'm first going to apologize because I didn't listen to the whole presentation because one early slide caught my attention, and it just struck me. The slide where we've got 17,000 graduate students out of roughly 67,000 students in the system. And I've always known that, but it just struck me that, wow, that's 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. And I started looking on collegedata.com. It defines a small college as less than 5,000, a medium size as 5 to 15, and a large university as a school with 15,000 or more students. Well, we have a large university of just graduate students. And it made me start thinking about what we do as a board here. So often I'm caught in the thought process of the 18-year-old student leaving home, becoming our undergraduate, the excitement, and that's happened in my house when Angie and I became empty nesters and our kids are out. 2 weeks ago we went to the football game and I said, wow, all the freshmen are here. You know, they got free tickets and stuff. I really think it has to help us. We have to think 1 out of our 4 students here is a graduate student. And it's a huge difference in talking about diversity. We have students probably from 18 to 30 in a general age group. We have diversity just by age. We have diversity by maturity levels. We have diversity by students with children. And those are things we just need to think about when we're setting tuition, when we're thinking about our all-university housing, and we're thinking about what opportunities we have for students. So I just want to thank you for jarring my thought process and making sure that we're thinking about all students all the time. And nothing against the 18-year-old freshman coming, but I think so many times that is all who we think about. And I think I appreciate the conversation today because it's made me realize that more and more. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, presenters. We look forward to more conversations in the months to follow. Members of the committee, as the new folks transition over, I encourage everyone to take a 15-second stretch because it's good for the brain.
Like to fly in there.
So, like, for example,
Okay.
We're buying a house here.
Yes, this is the order here, so the first order here.
Hi, I'm Tom Fisher.
Hi, Renee Kitchen.
Hi, Renee. Nice to meet you. Hi. Hi, you guys. Good to meet you. Thank you. Hi.
All right. She's going to need to advance her slide, so.
Oh, do you want to sit here? Why don't you sit
down?
No, we have to sit in order. Oh, we have to sit in order.
Well, they prefer that, but does that mean?
I see.
There you go. Okay, so how do I get it to?
Well, that was very sweet. Well, yeah.
Or can she give you a signal to advance her? Sure. Would that be, or one of you? Would that be okay?
Yeah, either way. How many slides do you have?
All right, members, I knew 15 seconds would turn into 60, and that's okay. We're going to come back together and continue the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Members, we're going to come back and continue the meeting. Next up, we are having a conversation that in many ways is a continuation of a several-part series that we had last year focused on faculty, well, on the outreach mission, but specifically we're going to have faculty presentations as well as some graduate students with a great transition from the conversation that we just had around graduate education. So with that, I will turn over to Provost Hanson for introductory remarks. We have quite the panel in front of us, so we look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Chair Omari. And members of the committee, as was just mentioned, this is an opportunity to show you how faculty support the university's outreach mission and is a capstone to last year's series of presentations about outreach. Our 6 presenters will provide examples of their work, speak to how it advances the university's 21st century outreach mission. We often describe our mission, but in fact it can be, I think, much more powerful when we have the opportunity to show you the university's mission. And I am delighted that we have with us today these 4 university faculty members and 2 students. And this will, in fact, then connect well with our previous conversation on post-baccalaureate education. I want to note that 2 of these colleagues will need to leave shortly after the first presentation in order to attend to responsibilities back on the Duluth campus. So they have to leave. They're not leaving in a huff when they get up and go. They're just being very responsible and being in 2 places almost in one time. But our first 2 presenters then come to us from the College of Pharmacy on the Duluth campus. Laura Palumbi is assistant professor in the College of Pharmacy. She's joined by her colleague, Kelsey Melgard, who's a 4th-year pharmacy student. And many of you know Professor Tom Fisher, who's currently the director of the Minnesota Design Center. Previously, he served 18 years on the Twin Cities campus as Dean of the College of Design, as well as Dean of the former College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Dr. Renee Critchlow is Assistant Professor and Director of Advocacy and Policy in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health in the School of Medicine on the Twin Cities campus. And Professor Larissa Minacucci is an Associate Professor of Veterinary Population Medicine on the Twin Cities campus. And she's joined by Michaela Dolan, who's a 3rd-year Doctor of Veterinary Medicine student with a particular interest in small animal medicine. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. And again, I believe we're starting with Professor Palumbi and Ms. Melgard.
Perfect. Please.
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and share with you what we are working on in northeastern Minnesota in the opioid crisis. We wanted to start with just a little bit of a map, just kind of looking at, so we work in St. Louis County and Carleton County, as well as the other counties in northeastern Minnesota, and we just wanted to set a bit of a landscape so you can see why this work is so critical in our state, and particularly in rural areas of our state. So the rural areas of our state have been hit very hard with the opioid crisis. One of the measures of that is heroin substance use disorder treatment admissions. And so you can see how those rural counties line up. You can see the difference between 2007 and 2016, and also which rural counties are really hit the hardest. We also have measures, and I should acknowledge the work of the Minnesota Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Human Services, who are very great about sharing their data with us so that we can really take the best, most effective approach. So these are their slides and their maps. But here's another map indicating IV drug use in the past 6 months. And again, you can see where we're working. St. Louis County is where Duluth is located. Carleton County is a neighboring county that we work in. So there's a huge need for this work. So if we were to combine our 3 main areas when it comes to addressing the opioid crisis, the first area is supporting rural interprofessional community coalitions, and these are grassroots coalitions in mobilizing against opioid use disorder. And that's where a lot of our work stems from, is working with these different coalitions, really taking their lead and coming up with community-specific solutions. I also work as a clinical consultant on the Carleton County Drug Court team, providing programming support, not only as a clinical consultant, but also conducting focus groups and doing some evaluation metrics with the drug courts. And lastly, our team has been engaged with healthcare systems and healthcare providers to improve care for patients with opioid use disorder. And I'm very fortunate that my student, Kelsey Melgard, she is a PharmD student, also pursuing her master's in public health, and she's been a critical part of this team, and she'll be taking the lead on sharing that piece with you.
So our community coalition activities are really the heart of what we do. We do community forums that can be panelist format or conference style, where we bring together professionals from the community, perhaps parents who's been impacted by substance use disorder in a child, or somebody who's sharing their own story. And in these coalition forums, we're able to get information out and actually gather information from the community on what they see as the most critical needs, because every community is specific and every community has specific strengths. We also provide in our coalitions education events, such as workshops and evening commitments for families, above the influence weeks or prevention in local high schools, and also programming for parents, as well as pursuing additional funding opportunities to bring more resources into these rural communities. Some of our community coalition activities also include trying to just get more education out in the community when it comes to removing opioids from circulation. There's a lot of opioids sitting in people's medicine cabinets, and so the more that we can get those out and just get those medications taken back, then the less likely they are to be misused or abused. We also work on public service announcements, prescription drug storage recommendations, community naloxone trainings and distributions. We've done those in many of our counties and are expanding more into institutions of higher education, and also engaging healthcare providers. And this next couple slides, my colleague Kelsey is going to be sharing with you. I've been very fortunate. She's been working with me for several years now. She's in her 4th year of the PharmD program and also finishing up her master's in public health. And we really rely on our students to help us with our research and outreach, because there's so much work to be done when it comes to the opioid crisis. Our students have great energy and great creativity, so thank you, Kelsey.
Great. Ms. Melgard, please.
Okay, so some of the ways that Dr. Plumby and some of her students are reaching out to the communities and engaging healthcare providers is reaching out to community pharmacies all over Minnesota, but also with a focus in St. Louis County and Carleton County. And this is to help implement naloxone protocols. This gives pharmacists the ability to prescribe naloxone without a physician prescription to patients who request it or are in need of it. It expands access of the naloxone, which will inevitably be used to save a life by reversing an opioid overdose. Naloxone is just like a seatbelt, just in case while patients are fighting their disease of addiction. Other ways we're engaging healthcare providers are working with local resources to expand medication-assisted treatment, treatment facilities, mental health support, and needle exchange programs. Dr. Plumby encourages professionals to engage in community coalitions and support the causes that they really care about. Lastly, there's multiple CME sessions on safe opioid prescribing, treatment of opioid use disorder, and other initiatives that have been developed through our initiatives. So these CME sessions have focused on healthcare providers' engagement in their clinics, their pharmacies, and their hospitals. And overall, they've been a success. Some of the findings from research surveys on these sessions have helped us realize that currently, provider-centered concerns generally take precedence over patient-centered concerns, despite questions being centered around patient care. Even in relatively engaged professionals, stigma and bias appear to be a significant barrier in caring for patients suffering with opioid use disorders.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Chair Omari, and we welcome any questions you might have. One other slide we wanted to touch on too, I apologize. As a result of our provider research and chatting with healthcare providers, we did create a naloxone resource site that has grown in popularity as it is online. It provides 1 hour of free continuing medical education to healthcare providers throughout the state, pharmacists and physicians and mid-level providers. And so 1 hour of free CME to learn more about the opioid antagonist naloxone so that it is accessible for all of our providers throughout the state.
Thank you, presenters. Just because we were going to wait to questions at the end, but we know that you all have to leave. So, and I already have 2 questions from Regents. So we're going to take those 2 questions and have the opportunity for you to answer them, and then we'll let you hit the road. Regent Simonson.
I have the opportunity to work in a 12-step program. I've worked with the drug court in our local area. Resources is a big problem. I don't like how it's structured, and it is a big problem, so I'm glad you're working on it. Also, Vice President Toller, when he presented something here, I can't remember when, one of his bullet points was mental health. And it's working with the people in recovery that I work with, that's a big issue. And do you coordinate with the medical department on that kind of issue? And then two, we also have a recovery program within the university. I read that it didn't score very well relative to some other programs. Are you working with them?
Oh. Thank you, Regent Simonson, Chair Omari, and thank you for the question. We do work, you are correct. The opioid crisis and the mental health crisis in rural Minnesota and of course everywhere are very closely related. I too have found in my work on drug court teams that the vast majority of the individuals we work with in drug court do have an underlying mental health condition, which is often results in their substance use. And of course, their substance use can then exacerbate their mental health conditions. So we do coordinate with mental health providers. It is very difficult in rural areas where we don't have the resources. Some of my colleagues, I know there's a new ECHO program. I don't know if you've heard about that yet, but that's one of the ways that the university and collaborators are working together to try to find ways to really bring more resources out to our rural communities that really, they just don't have the same access. And a lot of our drug court participants have a really difficult time finding somebody to provide medication-assisted treatment. That is a huge, huge barrier for northeastern Minnesota and other parts of the state too. So as for the program on our campus, I'm not currently collaborating with them, but I'm always open to new collaborations. We've been really very busy in the last, in the last year. I think we've just been so busy working on what's going on in our backyard that sometimes we're not taking a look at what other people are doing, and there's plenty of opportunities to collaborate. So I've been fortunate in the last couple months to find a great number of collaborators at our university. Thank you.
Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, presenters. Quick question. In the last legislative session, Senator Eaton and Representative Baker, who both lost children to opioid addiction, and they proposed a bill, I believe, 1 cent per prescription. I think that's correct. Were you involved in that initiative and supportive, or one step removed, or what? Comment, please.
Yep, thank you for the question, Regent Johnson, Chair Omari. I have a lot of collaborators throughout the state, so I know a lot of my collaborators were working on this. I was 1 step removed. I know our county, I work really closely with St. Louis County and Carleton, but St. Louis County under the statewide targeted response to the opioid crisis grant. And they were very supportive of that. I think the main concern was that whatever funding was collected would actually end up benefiting the people that really needed it, and how to make sure that that set of funds would really be directed quickly and properly to the people that were most in need. That was the main concern that I heard from people that were following the bill closer than I was.
Thank you.
Thank you, presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and for sharing with us. We look forward to hearing more and seeing more from both of you.
Thank you, Chair Omari.
Provost Hanson, who's up next?
Tom?
Yes, thank you, Chair Omari and members of the committee. I'm Tom Fisher. I direct the Minnesota Design Center at the College of Design, which uses human-centered design methods, working in communities across the state to help them envision a future that is more creative and more attuned to 21st century opportunities. The center was established 30 years ago by an endowment from the Dayton-Hudson Foundation, now the Target Foundation, and we have funding that both from public sector, funding from the state and counties, as well as from foundations. McKnight Foundation, for example, has been a long-time supporter of our work. We work in 3 areas. We work in urban design, so we work with the major cities across the state. We work in a new area called rural design. We're working a lot in small towns across greater Minnesota. And we're at the leading edge of a new emergent field called service design, where we're bringing human-centered design methods to the public sector and nonprofit sector. I operate the center as a platform to expand our impact. I can't do it all, and so in addition to a small core staff, we have anywhere from 3 to 8 graduate students working in the center at any time, and I have 20 affiliates who are practitioners and community members who are experienced in these areas. They work without salary until we get funding, and then they lead these projects with our graduate students with my oversight. And so this enables us to have a much broader reach and to do much more work for the funding that we have. I thought I'd just give you some examples of some of what we're doing in these 3 areas. So in the urban areas, we've been developing a lot of urban design guidelines around health, public health issues. So we just completed a set of guidelines for the city of Rochester as part of its Destination Medical Center efforts to create the America's City for Health, which have been nationally sort of recognized as a set of guidelines that can help cities that want to improve public health. We've also been working with the Towerside Innovation District just east of the campus here and developing guidelines and developing an innovation district. We also have done a study for communities around the university in a project called the Granary Corridor, which was an effort to see if we can connect the East Bank campus more effectively along the northern edge of it to enable access to Highway 280. We have also worked in Ramsey County with the Rail Authority in connecting downtown St. Paul to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport as well as up to White Bear Lake in a series of transit studies that we did, engaging the community to see how they wanted to access these communities. We've been active as well with MnDOT around this new area of lidding over highways to create development opportunities. We've been working with the Rondo community in St. Paul as well as in Edina. And then finally, some of our most recent urban work has been looking at the impact of autonomous vehicles on infrastructure and stormwater, again with MnDOT as a partner. And this has been part of 2 National Science Foundation grants. In Greater Minnesota, we're quite excited. We're doing a 2-year pilot project with the Department of Employment and Economic Development working in southeast Minnesota with 3 communities. We're working in Wabasha to help that community envision more creative ways to utilize their asset that has only been recently recognized as an asset, which is the dredge spoil from the dredging of the Mississippi River by the Army Corps of Engineers. They've simply been dumping this in Wabasha, and we're helping them realize that the way they dump it can actually create new kinds of landscapes that will attract the biking, birding, and boating communities that are a big key part of their economy. We're also working in a small town called Spring Grove, which is beginning to creatively envision a future for themselves where they would be a folk arts and culture educational destination for people in our region, as well as teaching folk agricultural skills to a younger generation. In the other corner of the state in northwest Minnesota, we're working with a community called Fertile, which is at the point where the 3 biomes of the state come together and recognizing that it has an opportunity to become a destination for people studying the environmental relationships among biomes. And then the third area that we're working in and have become nationally known for is this work in service design, where we're primarily working in the governmental educational healthcare systems to redesign services. So we just finished a project with Hennepin County on redesigning the eviction process to mitigate evictions through the court system. We also have worked with 4 metro counties in redesigning the adult foster care housing system to meet the requirements of the Americans for Disability Acts. We're currently doing quite a bit of work with Hennepin Healthcare around homelessness, and we're about to build a project with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, which would be emergency homeless shelters for people coming out of the emergency department at HCMC who have no place to go. And we're also working with a group of churches in Ramsey County taking a community-first approach to homelessness. We are also working in the higher education space. We've been asked by Minnesota State to work with some of their colleges, most recently Anoka Technical College, to reimagine higher education in the digital age. So that gives you a very quick overview of the range of things that we're doing. It's quite a diverse portfolio, but again, what is the organizing principle is to use human-centered design strategies to help communities of people thrive in the 21st century. We've been really recognized nationally for this work, and I appreciate the opportunity to present it here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fisher. There's not a place that I go and hear about urban design and your name does not come up.
Thank you, Chair Omari.
Next is Dr. Renee Critchlow.
Thank you, Chair Omari and members of the committee. As Provost Hanson said, I'm Dr. Renee Critchlow. I'm from the Medical School, Department of Family and Community Medicine. In 2012, our chair at that time, Dr. Max Baird, stood in front of the annual meeting of the Society for Teachers of Family Medicine and challenged the faculty to get out of the ivory tower and to get into the communities that they serve. Our family medicine residency program has the honor to serve North Minneapolis neighborhood for over 40 years. We answered Dr. Baird's challenge by creating the Ladder. The Ladder as an organization is meant to provide a pathway for underrepresented youth to enter and sustain healthcare careers. The Ladder as a function is a community of purpose and mentorship. We define mentorship as support plus challenge, and our purpose is to help each individual get to the next level. Our motto is lift as you climb, build as you go. This slide, since they told me I couldn't have a lot of slides, this slide actually represents the Ladder in one picture. Starting at about 7 o'clock, you'll see one of our younger scholars. We're all medical scholars. I'm not Dr. Critchlow when I'm at the meeting. I'm medical scholar Renee. Medical scholar Amari is at about 7 o'clock. She's in 5th grade. Medical scholar Shquall is an undergrad. Medical scholar Peter is a medical student. Medical scholar Nanton, Dr. Nanton, is one of the graduates of the University of Minnesota School of Medicine, and she's currently a resident physician in our program. The patient you see there is her personal continuity pregnant patient that came to one of our meetings where we have hands-on learning. And I think the thing that I find most amazing about this picture is this is a portrait of the cascading mentorship that we designed for the Ladder. And the real hook in this picture is the way that patient is looking at Dr. Nanton. It's complete trust. So we're in the community, serving the community, and the community is engaging with us. Our meetings are every second Saturday of the month, and we basically get together, we eat, we share stories, and then we do hands-on learning. I can tell you it's a very big challenge because we're both intergenerational and interprofessional, and there's nothing like teaching pregnancy but not mentioning where babies come from. But it's something that we do. We have 6th grade students who can read x-rays now. Wow. It's very funny. We had a radiology was the month before, and then the next month we had sports medicine. And the fellowship for the sports medicine, the fellows that were presenting, they held up an x-ray and they said, "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" And they were expecting one of the resident physicians or community physicians. And literally, the 6th grader walked up and goes, "There's a shoulder separation." And it's because we're not teaching them to pass the MCATs or anything like that. We're teaching them to engage. And we're teaching them that they have the ability to engage. We start at 4th grade, we have middle school, we have high school, we have undergrad, we have medical students, dental students, pharmacy students. We have postgraduate resident physicians, primarily our family medicine physicians, although we work closely with the emergency department for some of our presentations, and very closely with the dental school and pharmacy school for some of our presentations. Our goal is to expose these kids to a pathway to a healthcare career. And honestly, I don't care if they all become doctors. What I really want them to do is graduate high school, because that's the leading indicator of how long you're going to live and how long your children are going to live. So this is a sneaky way to get people interested in school and stay in school. And it's also a sneaky way to keep folks who are interested in primary care and family medicine sustained. Of the graduates of the medical school, typically about 20% go into primary care and family medicine, and that's great. but our state needs over 1,000 more primary care doctors. Of the medical students who participate in the ladder, 44% of them go into family medicine. One of the reasons we start in 4th grade is because middle school is the most dangerous time for the kids in our neighborhood. The leading cause of entering the school to prison pipeline is repeat suspensions. Repeat suspensions start in middle school. Mm-hmm. Of the participants in our program, none of our kids have ever been suspended. As I said, our idea about mentorship is support plus challenge. If you're just supporting people, you're just a cheerleader. If you're just challenging people, you're just a jerk. What we do is it's each one, teach one, and everyone is responsible for their own education and educating someone else. That's one of the things we talk about at the beginning of our intro. We're all medical scholars here. A scholar reads, a scholar listens, a scholar teaches, and a scholar learns. And every time they say that and they know that. And some of you may have seen the video that we sent out. That's the pledge that we have at the end of each meeting. We start the meeting with eating and stories, which is building culture. In the middle of the meeting, we have hands-on learning where people get the confidence and ability to know that they can do it. We end the meeting with a pledge, which is a commitment to both ourselves and our community and our future. The ladder, as I said, the motto is lift as you climb, build as you grow. This is our 5th anniversary. Can't see him, but Dr. Mac Baird, who made the challenge for our faculty to get out and engage with community, he's in the back row there. He's standing next to one of our medical scholars, Christopher, who was the first kid to be a part of the ladder. He's now a senior in high school at Patrick Henry. He's in advanced AP classes for every high school class that he has, but he's already taking college classes. He wants to be a gastroenterologist. You know, I'm still working on that. But the fact is, he has been challenged the whole time through. He would come to us and he was like, you know, Dr. Critchell, I got this great grade on the PSAT. I'm like, well, what'd you get? And he's like, blah, blah, blah. I was like, you can do better than that. Here's the Khan Academy site that's free and will help you. And he's like, he started doing it every single Sunday. And his grades are amazing. This is the thing. We run this at such a cost that it's basically less than $200 a meeting. The price that it takes to keep one youth offender in jail, I can run a chapter of the ladder for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. So, the ladder was our response to Dr. Baird's challenge. It's lift as you climb, build as you grow, and you're welcome to come any second Saturday of the month. We'd love to have you there.
Thank you. Next, we have Professor Minakuchi and Ms. Doan.
Well, thank you, Chair Amari and members of the committee for the opportunity to discuss our outreach work in collaboration with Native American communities in Minnesota. In the spirit of my community partners, I hope to paint a story for you today about the connections we have made with our Native American partners to improve not only animal health, but also community health and inspire the next generation of health professionals. For a visual depiction of our work, I believe most of you should have received a link to a video, so I encourage you to look at that if you have not seen that already. To give you a little history, in 2009, we were approached by the White Earth Nation about an ongoing problem with increasing dog bites on the reservation. And they were particularly concerned because the majority of the dogs were not vaccinated against rabies. And so the initial push for our partnership really was, could we help improve vaccination coverage so that we could add one sort of a step to try to prevent some of the issues going on. This led to me meeting with a motivated group of veterinary students, and we formed an organization called SERVS, which is the Student Initiative for Reservation Veterinary Services. SERVS is a campus life organization, so many of you are probably familiar with our student unions and activities. Here, there's 2 mechanisms for which we can form a student group. The campus life organization makes them a little more connected to the university, and we function within a departmental structure. For me, this has been an excellent mechanism to engage students because I get the support of the university in this student organization as we do our outreach work. I do want to stress this is very much a student-led initiative. I can't do this by myself. I have every clinic, every time we're visiting a reservation community, I have at least 30 students, pre-veterinary as well as professional veterinary students who are coming with me and maybe 1 or 2 other faculty and several volunteer veterinarians. Our students do the leadership, they do the budgeting, they write for all of our funding, all of our grant proposals are submitted by our students, they manage the clinics, and they provide education not only to their peers in preparation for the clinics, but also to the community members. We've seen considerable interest and growth in this organization since it started, with now about a quarter of the veterinary student body being involved in this group. Just to give you an idea about what we do, we have sort of a twofold mission in the communities that we work in. We provide veterinary services as well as youth education. For the veterinary services, we're providing not only wellness clinics, which is your basic vaccines, dewormers, flea and tick preventatives for small animals, so dogs and cats, although we did see a potbelly pig once. And then we also do spay and neuter surgeries. So when we started in 2009 to 10, we were averaging maybe seeing about 200 animals a year for wellness and about 50 surgeries. In 2017, we saw over 600 animals across six communities and 200 surgeries performed. So really the need has continued, and we're continuing to provide those services. We work with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, with the White Earth Nation, with Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, Lower Sioux Indian community, as well as the Little Earth community here in Minneapolis. For our youth education, we have an informal component. With every clinic, there's an on-site youth education component where our students are delivering educational interaction for the kids. The kids are allowed to come and sit in on our clinical encounters. They can watch surgery, they can ask questions, and so it's a really good way to engage the youth. We also have a formal education program that the veterinary school runs called Vet Camp. Vet Camp is led by veterinary students. It's a more formal education program exposing students to aspects of veterinary medicine. And we've delivered those formal programs in the communities in Leech Lake as well as White Earth. And the White Earth was done in partnership with the University of Minnesota Extension. I would be remiss if I did not recognize the partners that are involved in this. And so these are our community members. In all the communities we work, we have a community liaison who arranges our site for the clinic. Usually these are community centers, big gyms. We set up kind of a MASH style clinic. They provide food for us. They provide housing for our volunteers. And so there's really an exchange in terms of the services provided. We work with a nonprofit called Native American Humane Society, which has been instrumental in helping us make some of the connections. We have several granting organizations that fund the work that we do, and I really need to appreciate the volunteer veterinarians and technicians throughout the state of Minnesota who provide their time to come and teach our students and oversee their activities at these clinics. It's been a great way for our students to engage in local and statewide practitioners, so they're not just interacting with veterinary faculty, they're actually working with practitioners out in the state. You know, I read the university mission for outreach and public service, and I really think what our group focuses on is the exchange component. And I think you've heard that from other presenters that the imparting of knowledge is really probably not the best model, I think, when we're doing this work, and there needs to be a bilateral exchange of ideas. Our communities are providing education to our students. A community elder told me once that she said it was a huge honor for her to bring her dog to our clinic so that she could teach our students. And that has resonated with me from the time that we started this project. Our students, in turn, are providing education in the community. Our students are gaining cultural competence, and we invite community members actually come to the Twin Cities campus and deliver presentations about working in Native American communities and what our students need to know prior to going into those settings. It's allowing us to have an ability to respond to community needs and investigate scholarly questions as we've built this mutually beneficial partnership. And transparency and honesty is key, and I think you've heard this from our other presenters as well. We can't maintain long-standing community relationships without that openness that you have. So why is this valuable to me as a faculty member? Well, I can honestly say it's the most fulfilling part of my job. It's a fantastic complement to core teaching activities. I have a standard curriculum I have to deliver, but when I'm out in the community, I'm aware of needs and things that maybe I don't see in my office. And so I can implement those portions and those activities and that information into my teaching. It's an ability to see and learn about community interests and needs firsthand, and so I think this gets to some of the questions that have been raised earlier. How do we prepare our graduates? Well, now I can see what the needs are, and I can bring that back to the classroom. And it's allowed me to have an amazing network of partners, which facilitates all aspects of my role in the university mission in terms of teaching, research, and service. And now that we've had a long-standing partnership, we're starting to build some of the research collaborations that often you can't do when you walk right into a community on day one. So I think I would also like you to hear the student perspective. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Michaela Dolan. Michaela's a third-year veterinary student and our current president of SERVS.
Welcome, Ms. Dolan.
Thank you. Chair Omari and members of the board. Really, I'm here today to kind of go over how SERVS complements my education as a veterinary student and the current curriculum that we have, as well as how it's going to continue to impact my career well beyond graduation day. And so, as Larissa mentioned, I'm the SERVS president. I've been involved in SERVS in some capacity for about 3 years. And I've also, throughout my university education, been to a lot of different structured labs that are really controlled for that 100 people. And it's allowed us to get a lot of really great clinical skills, a lot of practical skills. So SERVS really is an extension of those labs as a student. From my side of it, it looks more as though we're able to have more exposure to clients. We're able to have more exposure to different cultures, different priorities, different values. And usually as a veterinary student, we don't get that exposure to clients until our 4th and final year. And so the design and the model of outreach that SERVS provides, we're really getting, it's facilitating an earlier interaction with those clients. To give you an idea, there are about 5 to 6 pre-veterinary students, 20 to 30 veterinary students, 4 to 5 vets, and 2 to 3 vet technicians on every single trip. So we're able to be a little bit more autonomous and make some more of those medical decisions while still having the support of professors there, the support of outside veterinarians and technicians, and still make those decisions. So if you ask any student, I'd be willing to bet they'd tell you that there is no substitute for hands-on experience in the medical field. And SERVS allows us to run diagnostics, come up with treatment plans, and much more in this real-life limitation setting. So overall, in veterinary medicine, communication can really make or break an interaction with a client. And you learn that early on, especially with SERVS. And so students are gaining, and I've seen this time and time again, students coming up to me telling me, hey, what do you like about it? And they say, I'm coming away with a better level of emotional intelligence, of self-awareness, and being able to handle those client interactions. I know I'm running out of time, but really it's about learning to work with the clients, empower the community to be able to take care of their animals, and teach students that socioeconomic standing doesn't dictate a person's ability to be a good pet owner.
Great, thank you. It sounds like you're answering some of Regent Simonson's questions from earlier. So we have about 10 minutes for discussion, and I have 5 members of the committee who want to go. So I'm going to start with Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you for putting this on the agenda. I don't remember when we've had as much of a direct connect between on this topic since I've been on the board for 10 years, and these are. All the presenters did a really good job. The truth is we could march through thousands of our faculty who could tell stories about our community's needs and their work. I've never met a faculty member that wasn't engaged in our community in some manner, either through board work or with groups around the state. It's really hard, though, to roll all this up and to put a bow around it. We talked about this. It's frustrating from a university's image standpoint because it is really dispersed. It's really a couple of things really resonate with me personally. The opioid presentation. I have a nephew who was murdered last year in western Hennepin County, and I know my sister and our family really appreciate the urgency that this initiative is taking. All your work is important, but there's almost nothing more urgent than that. And I'm glad to see that. Later note, Professor Fisher, when you were dean and before I was on the board, you helped mediate a project that the bank was involved with. And that's, a lot of what our faculty does is plays a mediation role, a problem-solving role. We're seen as a neutral party, and that our faculty are so well-skilled, and Professor Fisher is really good at this, helping deal with sort of the emotionalism around projects, dealing with emerging technologies, but realistic sort of business needs. So I've seen firsthand your work out there in the community, close to the university, but elsewhere, currently around the state as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Omari. I have really appreciated this presentation. It's really why we do what we do, and it's so great to hear the examples. I've been familiar with what Tom Fisher has done for years in my field. He popped up everywhere and always added to the richness of what people try to do in urban areas. I wish that legislators had been here today, and I would urge our communication team to get these kind of stories out. These are the kinds of things that we need them to know when we go and ask them to support what we do. So I would like to make that request. But thank you for what you do, and maybe some Saturday morning I'll show up.
We'll go together.
Okay.
Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair Omari. Thank you, presenters. Very impressive presentations from everyone. Please tell the other two that I said that if you see them. I think I want to echo what Regent Lucas just said about getting these stories out there. Professor Fisher, I would like to hear a little bit more. I mean, I'm very impressed with the breadth of your work, but I would like to hear a little bit more about reimagining higher ed in the digital age. Maybe a few minutes now or whenever we have time, but I think that's very important for kind of the future of the university, obviously, because the digital age isn't going away, and hopefully higher ed isn't going away, so we need to figure out how to put the two together. I am interested in being a medical scholar, so I'm not going to medical school, but I wouldn't mind being a medical scholar. So I would like to go and visit your second Saturday a month at some point?
Yeah, it's the second Saturday of each month, and I will make sure that the Provost's office has the link that you guys can get the announcements. You don't have to sign up in advance.
Great.
I think what might be appropriate is to get links to all of their either web pages or whatever it is that y'all have listed, and the videos are helpful as well. Professor Fisher, would you like to say a little bit now? And then I actually think that it would be appropriate to take a deeper dive for the board if you send out information. It sounds like that's done now. That project's done.
Yes, Chair Omari and Regent Shu. We've been working with our College of Education and Human Development, Professor David Wirtz's group, working with universities. We did a big project at the University of Nebraska to help them understand a better way to merge some of their units and really engage the students and the faculty in a way that turned a really conflicted and quite emotional situation into one where everybody felt like they had been heard, and it actually saved that institution a lot of money. And now Minnesota State has come to us. These workshops we've been leading with faculty, students, and staff in the Minnesota State system has really helped them think much more creatively about the roles they can play in their communities. So we agree, higher education is here to stay, but it is changing rapidly, and the more we can engage our colleagues. And I think the kinds of things we keep hearing are the kinds of things you just heard at this table. The faculty, students want to be in the communities. They want to apply their knowledge. And so I think I probably speak for all of my colleagues here that we think this is the future of higher education.
Great. Thank you. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Omari. I really appreciated this too. I had no idea all this was going on. This is mainly directed to Dr. Krishlow. Did I say that correctly? I'm from Southwest Minnesota, and a small community. Over 50% of our grade school students are English second language. We have something like 52 different dialects. And you may have heard me, I'm involved in a 12-step recovery program. My wife and I had the privilege of starting a safe, sober home for gender specific in the region. So We get multiple nationalities in there. And in the recovery program, I see third generation involved in that. So basically, my question is, do you reach down to that area? Do you get involved in that area? I'd like to see if you do, and be involved with you.
Thank you, Chair Amari and Regent Simonson. That's an excellent question. We are actually working with Dr. Kirby Clark, who is the RPAP and MetroPAP coordinator. RPAP and MetroPAP are longitudinal third-year programs in medical school, and RPAP is throughout the greater Minnesota. It's the Rural Physicians something AP program. And what our goal is to provide a chance to have rural ladders. I moved here from Montana. I lived in a town of about 3,000, and one of my clinics was in a town of about 600. And when I've come to medical school application processes, the two big areas I feel very disappointed in is underrepresented minorities and rural represented students. And I won't say what university said it, but I remember one admissions folks saying, well, the rural students aren't really that polished. And I didn't hit him because I'm a professional. But what we thought about is that this is another opportunity for us to do. It probably won't be something that we'd be able to do every month, but since we have medical students out in those communities and they're in a longitudinal time, we might be able to do it like every 3 months, every quarter, to gather people from countywide and bring them together longitudinally to move things forward. So as I said, we're working with the RPAP organization to see if we can launch what we'd call the rural ladder.
Thank you. Thank you. Student Representative Pethulis.
Thank you, Chair Amari. So one thing I just wanted to highlight the professional student example with relating to what Dr. Krishla said. So we heard from Provost Hanson that graduate students will be mastering one set of information over a longer period of time. And I think that what we just heard today was that, I have 100 flashcards to do after this. So yeah, it's one smaller portion of knowledge, but cool faculty outreach programs like this allow us to apply that knowledge in a wide variety of settings, whether it be rural, urban, with underserved people like that. So I think that really the faculty outreach is really complementary to our academic mission.
Great, thank you for that comment. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence in making me number 6 of the 5 you announced earlier. First, I would just say that the response from the board is a good news, more work to do story. Because if everybody's saying, wow, we didn't know this was going on, we obviously need to keep working at that and making this known to the community. And I know we've got people doing great work, and the world changes fast, but it just encourages me to call for more focus on ensuring that the community knows this is happening. Dr. Krishlow, a couple things real quick. One is, and I just can't miss this opportunity, one could suggest that the ACT rigidity consideration here is kind of a polite way of saying those communities aren't polished enough.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a conversation we need to continue as a board to ensure that we're reaching the 2 communities that you identified, which have been, I think, the focus for me as I've been back here to the board. But I do want to just go into just the substance a little bit. I'm really encouraged when you talk about the effect of the program on these students, and you talked about how none of our students have ever been suspended. Here's my question. It's a little bit like how charter schools have great success. Well, part of the success is the fact they have parents that care enough to find the school that fits. Is it causal or correlated? Are you finding students that would tend to be successful and that's why they're in the program, or are you able to really reach students that would just normally have been left to fall in through the cracks?
Thank you, Chair Amari and Regent Rocha. That's a great question. I'm so excited that you asked that, because this is the land of we don't know, but this is what we do know. We know that, number one of the things that we teach at the ladder is failure. Because a lot of these communities, they believe in talent. And they're like, if you don't make it, it's because you're not talented enough. But we teach that failure is an important process of learning, and that, honestly, if one of our kids gets suspended, that's not a problem. We'll work with them. But the reason we start in the 4th grade is to prepare that mindset. Has anyone ever heard of the crabs in the barrel concept? There's like crabs that are trying to get out of the barrel. And as one starts getting up, the others start pulling them down. And very often in academia, in these underserved communities, if you're the smart kid, people pick on you and try to pull you down because you're not acting, honestly, in our community, you're acting white. So one of the most important things we do is we teach people that no one else is allowed to destroy your career. We don't know if we're causal or correlated, but what I do know is that the kids that we work with come back and they talk to us about the challenges that they've had and how they addressed it based on what we taught them. One of the things we do when we say eat and share time with each other, we put up 2 quotes on the board. One might be fall down 7 times, get up 8. One might be you have 2 hands, one's to help yourself and one's to help another. And you have to introduce yourself while you're eating. I'd be like, I'm medical scholar Renee. I'm going to choose the fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I'll tell the story of how I had to go to 3 undergrad institutions before I graduated. And now I teach at one of the finest medical schools in the world. That's an important thing for them to hear. So I don't know if it's correlative or causative, but I do know that our goal is to expand the pool beyond the super smart kids who come out of high school that we keep recruiting. We want to make that pool bigger. And one of the biggest ways we make that pool bigger is we teach failure and hard work and support.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talked about, Regent Rocha, was outreach. We're currently working with the Star Tribune to have a feature article on the latter within 2 months.
Excellent. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to go ahead and say y'all deserve a round of applause. Thank you to the presenters for being here and sharing with us the wonderful work that y'all are doing. We look forward to more. We'll now turn to the consent report. First I'll obtain a motion and a second, and then have Provost Hanson make some remarks. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Provost Hanson?
Thank you. The occupational therapy program is a response to new accreditation standards, creating a doctor of occupational therapy. That's going to be in 2027, the required entry-level degree for new occupational therapists. So we're just getting ahead of the curve here, and the program is about to have its accreditors come and visit, so they've opted to make this change now early, and then they will not have to be reaccredited later. So we have a new Master's of Professional Studies in Civic Engagement coming out of College of Continuing and Professional Studies, a graduate minor in the medical school in neuroscience. Public Health has a new graduate minor in American Indian Public Health and Wellness. The Swenson College of Science and Engineering in Duluth has a new Master of Science in Mathematical Sciences, and Crookston has a new bachelor's degree and an undergraduate minor in English education. We're also making a few program changes, and 2 Masters of Science degrees are being discontinued. In addition, the consent report importantly contains tenure conferral for 13 professors with the names, ranks, and schools, along with brief bios were in your docket materials.
Great, thank you. Any comments from the members of the committee? Yes. Regent Shue.
I do have, thank you, Chair Omari. Just one question for the Provost. When we cancel programs, how does that affect students? And do they get enough warning, or I don't know how we handle them if they're kind of almost ready to finish when we cancel a program. So just wondering.
Provost Hanson.
Regent Shue, Chair Omari, members of the committee, we never leave students midstream in a program. They are always have a pathway to finish the program, and we never do that.
Thank you.
Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Omari, and a question for Provost Hanson here. The very final recommendation, promotion in rank, is posthumous, I note, and is that relative to us not having met again since then and recognizing I'm Professor Nanny, is it, in the medical school? A little detail. I'm not critical of it. I'm just curious and wanted to understand.
It was a promotion that was in train at the time of death, and it means something to the family to see that completed.
I'm fully supportive, and I thank you for the added explanation and context.
And I think it's important. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Information items, Provost Hanson.
A lot of important information items. I mean, we lead with the gift from the Carlson Family Foundation, an investment of $10 million in the Carlson School. So we are very, very grateful for that. They're one of the largest donors to the Driven campaign. We have a very large grant to something on the liberal arts side, $300,000 grant to the Department of History from the Mellon Foundation to advance the research for research and training of graduate students in American history. And in particular, that fellowship is aimed at diversifying the next generation of scholars by supporting students studying African American, Native American, and immigration history. And the eventual aim is to diversify the professoriate. The College of Science and Engineering has received a $12 million grant for over 4 years from the Department of Energy to continue leading the discovery of a new class of materials used in energy research. We have a whole number of absolutely terrific awards and grants, and I just bring them to your attention. Too many to read now, but I see everybody's putting away their books. But please do take a look at the things in the information report, because they're all good news stories.
Thank you for highlighting some of those, Provost Hanson. And as you mentioned, I'd encourage you all to take a look at those. Regent Hsu.
Yes, thank you, Chair Omari. Just a question. I noticed the $3.1 million, grant from DARPA.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if it doesn't say what department or college that's going to. Is that a multidisciplinary grant, or is it going somewhere specific?
I believe that's a CSE grant.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, most of the work is CSE.
Great. With that, members, this committee meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Wow, 2 answers that Hsu loves. 2 answers that you love. One is we don't leave anyone behind, and 2